I worked for the Park Service in the vast, untamed wilderness of Alaska for a while. My days were usually filled with routine tasks, ensuring the trails remained clear, the campsites were tidy, and the wildlife undisturbed. It was a job that demanded a deep respect for nature and an understanding of isolation. The air always had a crisp, wild scent, and the silence, when it fell, was profound, broken only by the whispers of the wind through the pines or the distant call of a hawk. I often felt a deep sense of peace out there, a quiet contentment that came from being truly immersed in the raw beauty of the land. One crisp autumn afternoon, a call came into our station. It was about some illegal dumping along one of the local trails, a common but frustrating occurrence. People, despite the beauty surrounding them, would often take shortcuts, leaving their trash where it didn't belong, disrupting the delicate balance of the ecosystem. It was usually simple stuff: old tires, bags of household refuse, sometimes construction debris. Nothing particularly sinister, just lazy and disrespectful. My partner, Mark, a seasoned veteran of the Park Service with eyes that seemed to see everything, and I geared up to investigate. We grabbed our clipboards, a few trash bags, and our radios, ready for what we expected to be another routine cleanup. The trail we were headed to was fairly remote, winding deep into the woods, far from the main access points. It wasn't heavily trafficked, but we'd occasionally see a few dedicated joggers or dog walkers enjoying the solitude. The sun was low, casting long shadows, and the air was beginning to carry the chill of the approaching evening. We talked about nothing in particular, enjoying the rhythmic crunch of our boots on the gravel, the familiar sounds of the forest around us. As we rounded a particularly sharp bend in the path, the kind that opened into a slightly wider clearing before narrowing again, Mark suddenly stopped. His usual easygoing demeanor vanished, replaced by a rigid stillness. He looked into the dense undergrowth to our left, his brow furrowed. "What in the world is that?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's a guy over there." My gaze followed his. About 20 yards away, partially obscured by a thick cluster of low-hanging branches and ferns, was a man. He was fair-skinned, with longish, somewhat stringy hair, and he was crouched low to the ground, almost as if he were trying to become one with the bush. What struck me immediately, what sent a shiver down my spine, was that he wasn't just in the woods. He was intensely, unblinkingly staring at us. His eyes, though partially hidden by the strands of his hair, seemed fixed, unwavering. It was an unnerving sight. I felt that peculiar sensation that fear brings, a sudden fuzzy stillness in the air, a slight blurring at the edges of my vision, and a prickling on my skin. It wasn't the kind of fear that makes you scream or run, but a deeper, more primal unease. As I mentioned, we often encountered people on these trails: hikers, joggers, people with dogs. They were always out in the open, greeting us with a friendly nod or a wave as we passed. If they paused, it was to rest, perhaps have a snack, always leaving their small amounts of trash in a designated receptacle or packing it out. This man was different. He wasn't stretching or enjoying the scenery. He was deliberately hidden, observing. His posture, low and coiled, reminded me uncomfortably of some predatory animal, waiting. The image of him brought to mind Gollum from the old stories, that gaunt, hunched figure, perpetually hiding and lurking. This man, while dressed in regular outdoor clothing, had a similar, almost contorted crouch, as if his body was used to moving unseen close to the earth. His long, unkempt hair only added to the unsettling resemblance, making him seem wild and disconnected from the ordinary world. We were in Alaska, a place where you expected to encounter majestic wildlife: bears, moose, wolves. A skinny, pallid man hiding in the bush was the last thing on my mind. When Mark had gestured into the trees, I'd been half expecting to see a set of glowing eyes or a shaggy silhouette, certainly not a human figure attempting to conceal himself. Then, the purpose of our patrol clicked back into my mind: illegal dumping. And suddenly, his strange behavior made a twisted sort of sense. No one wanted to be caught with a hefty fine for something so thoughtless. Hiding in the bush would certainly fit the bill for someone trying to avoid being discovered in the act. The moment he realized we had seen him, a remarkable transformation occurred. He straightened up, slowly, almost theatrically, then stretched his arms wide, high above his head, as if savoring the crisp mountain air. His face, which had been so intense and focused just moments before, now wore a wide, almost too bright smile. He began to approach us, walking with a casual, confident stride that utterly contradicted his previous, hidden posture. As he drew closer, Mark's expression shifted from suspicion to mild surprise. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "It's Tom." It turned out Mark actually knew this man. He was a local builder, a man who owned a construction company in the nearby town. In fact, he had built a new deck for Mark's friend just the year before. The world, even in Alaska, sometimes felt incredibly small. After they exchanged polite greetings, the man, Tom, offered a quick, somewhat flimsy explanation for his presence in the dense undergrowth. He claimed he had simply stepped off the path for a moment to take a leak. The excuse felt thin, almost laughably so. We had seen him, clearly, and that was definitively not what he had been doing. There was an artificiality to his explanation, a forced casualness that didn't quite ring true. However, since Mark knew him and he didn't appear outwardly suspicious in that moment, no shovel, no trash bags, we didn't press the issue. We had a job to do, and finding illegal dumping was our priority. After a quick, perfunctory glance around the immediate area, confirming there was no obvious evidence of recently discarded materials, we turned to head back. Surprisingly, Tom fell into step beside us. He walked with us for a considerable distance, far longer than was necessary, given his stated reason for being off the trail. It was during this walk that I truly began to understand Mark's earlier description of him as a chameleon. Tom was one of those individuals who seemed to effortlessly adapt his persona to whomever he was with. He would agree with everything we said, nodding enthusiastically, offering affirming sounds, desperately trying to make himself likable. It was as if he had no core personality of his own, but rather reflected back what he perceived others wanted to see. He started by talking about his construction company, detailing the various projects he had undertaken, the challenges of the building season, and how business was faring. When our responses were polite but perhaps lacked the enthusiastic interest he sought, he smoothly transitioned, without missing a beat, into a detailed account of his military career. This shift struck me as particularly odd, given the bizarre behavior we had just witnessed. What was a decorated Army veteran doing squatting in the woods, seemingly observing people on a hiking trail? It felt like a significant red flag, a piece of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. Yet, he continued his efforts to charm us, his demeanor unwavering, his stories flowing easily. I decided to tuck away my unease, not wanting to make an awkward situation worse. At one point, we asked if he had seen anyone illegally dumping anything. His response was a theatrical performance. He threw his arms up, gesturing wildly, his voice rising, and falling as he recounted an exaggerated litany of things he claimed to have witnessed. He spoke of stranger men and women on the trails at night, chasing people, unloading garbage by the truckload. It was so over the top, so embellished, that it sounded entirely made up, designed to deflect any further questions about his own activities. His eyes were wide, almost manic, as he described these fantastical scenarios, seemingly enjoying the drama of his own narrative. Mark and I exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. We both knew the trails well. Such widespread, dramatic dumping and late-night activity were simply not a common occurrence. A few years later, long after that strange encounter had faded into the background of my routine Park Service duties, I heard about Tom again. It was through the grapevine, a piece of news that slowly spread through the small, interconnected Alaskan communities. He had been arrested. The initial reports were vague, sensationalized. I heard he had been involved in some sort of altercation at a coffee shop, perhaps a robbery gone wrong, resulting in a shooting. The news was shocking, but perhaps not entirely unbelievable given the oddness I had witnessed. Then, the full truth began to emerge, and it was far more bizarre and infinitely more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. The man we had encountered on the trail, the chameleon-like builder, was not just a common criminal. He was Israel Keys, a name that would soon become synonymous with chilling random evil. The coffee shop incident was not a simple robbery. He had abducted, tortured, and murdered the young girl who worked there. As the investigation unfolded, a truly horrific picture began to form. It turned out he had been traveling around the country for years, committing random murders, leaving a trail of unspeakable violence in his wake. His methods were chillingly precise and deliberate. He would bury what he called murder kits, caches of guns, cash, tools, anything he might need, in remote locations, sometimes returning years later to dig them up and use them in his monstrous acts. Mark, my coworker, had the most chilling theory about our encounter. He believed that the initial anonymous call about illegal dumping wasn't about trash at all. He thought someone had likely seen Keys, or perhaps a glimmer of light, while Keys was in the process of digging one of his holes to bury his gruesome equipment. Once Keys realized he had been spotted, and knowing that some of the items in that hole could potentially be traced back to him and link him to multiple crimes across the country, he had decided to intercept whoever came to investigate. By walking with us, by keeping us talking and entertained, he could ensure we didn't double back and accidentally stumble upon his half-buried bag of bloody tools or other incriminating items. If this theory was true, his plan had worked perfectly. It also explained why he had walked with us for such a long time. Maintaining his pleasant, agreeable facade, he was simply ensuring our path didn't intersect with his hidden horrors. After I learned the full truth about Keys, the memory of that day haunted me. I returned to the spot where we had found him, months later, when I was off duty and the memory was fresher. I searched the undergrowth, painstakingly, trying to locate any disturbed earth, any sign of a hidden cache. The forest, usually a source of comfort, now felt oppressive, tainted by the knowledge of what might have been concealed beneath its quiet surface. I didn't find anything, just the usual tangle of roots and damp earth. Other theories suggested he might have been waiting to surprise a victim on the trail, but that didn't seem to fit his established pattern, at least not as it was later understood. Our encounter, that brief, unsettling conversation in the Alaskan wilderness, remains something I have never been able to fully explain. Since he took his own life, before standing trial, the full scope of his depravity and the true meaning of that day will likely never be known. Honestly, it's probably for the best that we never fully understood what we walked into. This man allegedly abducted and murdered somewhere in the ballpark of 11 men, women, teenagers, and even children. He traveled the country seemingly at random, without a discernible victim profile. It truly seemed to be a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, just like our casual encounter with him out there in those quiet woods. Israel Keys was an incredibly violent and disturbingly accomplished killer. His crimes extended beyond murder. He committed home invasions, set buildings on fire, and executed bank robberies. All of this was in addition to abducting and assaulting women in various states. He eluded authorities for at least 15 years, perhaps even longer, a chilling testament to his cunning and the random nature of his evil. The thought that we had walked, conversed, and even laughed in the presence of such a monster, completely unaware of the darkness he carried, still sends a cold wave of dread through me whenever I remember that seemingly ordinary day on the Alaskan Trail. It was a stark reminder that true terror can often hide in plain sight, behind a friendly smile and a practiced lie. When I was younger, I volunteered for search and rescue in the town where I lived. I'd always been a hiker, drawn to the solitude and challenge of the mountains, so it felt natural to offer my time when emergencies arose. The region wasn't known for high-profile missing persons cases, nothing that garnered national attention. Our missions tended to be more consistent through the late summer and fall, when more people were out on the trails and weather could turn quickly. That was when I'd get the call most often. One particular autumn evening, the phone rang, signaling a new mission. A person had disappeared relatively recently. They had been with a group who returned from a hike without him and immediately called it in, rather than attempting to search on their own. Volunteers got these missions frequently because of the quick turnaround time and the generally light nature of the situations. Most of the time, these missing hikers had simply turned around, perhaps taken a wrong turn off the main trail, or sustained a minor injury. There was a very high probability of a successful extraction, so the call went out for all hands on deck as quickly as possible. All volunteers were assigned to park rangers or search and rescue operations leads. We were split into groups of 3 or 4, each with a designated lead. It was an organized chaos, a multitude of headlamps bobbing in the dark as we spread out, forming a vast grid across the rugged terrain. My team was tasked with sweeping a sloping ridge that eventually led back onto a wide, flat plateau. Many of us knew this particular wedge of the wilderness quite well, and we moved through it in a standard grid search pattern, covering ground systematically. The air was filled with the low murmur of walkie-talkie chatter, punctuated by the occasional distant beams of light cutting through the canyon. We were spread out, perhaps a quarter mile between teams, allowing us to cover a significant area. We quickly learned to distinguish between the moving lights of other search and rescue teams and the stationary lights of campers or ranger stations. Our eyes constantly scanned the darkness for any sign of distress, a large flickering fire or strobing lights that might signal an SOS. Hikers often got creative when they found themselves lost overnight. Our team lead stayed in constant contact with the teams to our east and west, switching channels frequently for the overall contact between all teams. It was a superbly organized unit, and it made me proud to be involved, even if we were just what they jokingly called fair weather weekend warriors. Though, I distinctly remembered this mission was on a Tuesday night, far from a weekend. Whatever the case, our team of 4 felt a quiet conviction that we were going to be the ones to find this missing hiker. Call it a hunch, but we just had a strong feeling he was somewhere within our assigned square of the grid. The terrain we were covering was deceptive. From the base, it looked like a simple, gentle slope, promising a great view from the top. The reality, however, was far different. It was steep, jagged, and much further down than it appeared, with switchbacks that could easily disorient you, making one direction feel like the other. Once you reached the plateau, it was so flat and wide that you'd think you were on level ground, not at a 7,000-foot elevation. As we ascended, we began to hear something. Periodically, from off-trail, in the thick brush, there was a definite sound of movement. The undergrowth was quite overgrown, so in the dead silence of the wilderness, you could hear someone walking a quarter mile away if you truly listened. We would stop now and again, listening intently, then all shout the missing person's name together. A couple of times, we thought we might have heard a response, a real faint sound coming from further up the ridge from us. It was enough to spur us on, to make us believe we were getting closer. Once we reached the top of the plateau, the sounds became clearer. We could hear a definite, heavy stomping around in the tree line ahead. Animals don't usually do that when a group of humans is just a few hundred yards off, sweating, yelling, and shining flashlights. Most wild creatures are long gone by the time we even enter an area. We were confident whatever was cruising around was human. Perhaps our missing hiker, disoriented and moving clumsily in the dark. But as we crested the lip of the plateau and got onto the flatland, our radio channel buzzed with all kinds of chatter. A group across the canyon had found him. He was along a dry spillway, pretty much the exact opposite of where we thought he was going to be. We were relieved he was recovered, with no injuries, and already en route for treatment. But there was a small pang of disappointment after hyping ourselves up. And more importantly, there was the lingering question of the stomping we had heard. All of us lingered along the ridgetop, silently listening, waiting to hear whatever it was again. But it never sounded again. After 10 minutes of looking up at the countless stars that blanketed the Alaskan sky, we began the slow descent back down to the trailhead where the command post was set up. The air grew colder as we dropped in elevation, and the moon, now higher, cast long, distorted shadows among the trees. Once we got about halfway down the face, we knew we'd be able to see the spotlights from the command post, guiding us for the last mile or two. As we approached that halfway point, a light appeared, much closer to us than any expected guide beam, maybe just a few hundred yards down the face. We weren't navigating by a standard map trail, but by a series of game trail switchbacks that got us to the top much faster. As we had climbed, we'd moved out in a spread formation to comb the area, but since the hiker had been found, we were now coming down as a single unit. We stopped when we saw the light. It was eerily bright, a powerful beam cutting through the darkness. One of the other volunteers suggested that maybe it was the group to the east of us, lagging behind and just waiting. It wasn't uncommon for teams to rendezvous on return trips or even during a search. It could get creepy and lonely out there in the dark. The more, the merrier was always the philosophy. The park ranger we were with linked into the channel shared only by the teams east and west of us. He reported in, his voice calm, and asked if there was another team near the position where we could see the light. A moment of static, then the response came through, clear as day. These guys were 2 and 3 miles ahead of us respectively. One group had practically made it back to the command post, and the other was all but 30 minutes out. We thanked them, then killed the radio. The sudden silence, after the reassuring crackle of the walkie-talkie, felt heavy. Then, collectively, all 4 of us looked back down at the waiting light. What in the world is that? I couldn't help but ask. I was the newest guy on our team, and my inexperience just got the better of me. It turned out no one had a good answer. We were all a little rattled, even the seasoned park ranger who had lived here for years. His usual stoicism was replaced by a visible tension in his shoulders. But just as we began to descend again, perhaps drawn by some unspoken agreement to investigate, the light clicked off, totally disappeared. There was no moment of fading, no flicker, no dimming. It was just gone, swallowed by the profound darkness of the mountain. We all exchanged glances, then shook our heads, a mutual, unspoken agreement passing between us. We pushed into the darkness, a couple of us even turning on additional headlamps and handheld lights, as if in defiance of the light that had vanished. We hit the area where we estimated the light had to have been positioned, but there wasn't any evidence of anything. No discarded batteries, no scorch marks from a powerful lantern, no trash, no litter, no smoke, no tracks, nothing. We even scanned the trees above, just to be sure it hadn't been an optical illusion or a reflection. It was as if the light had simply ceased to exist, leaving no trace. All 4 of us shared that feeling I would call dread, a cold, heavy sensation that settled deep in our chests. We started talking about how we couldn't wait to get off the mountain. The anxiety was almost palpable, a thick blanket of unease. I got to talking with another volunteer, a lanky man named Alex, who had been with SAR for a couple of years. We got a little distracted as we walked, comparing thoughts on that weird crashing sound we'd heard earlier and the even weirder light that had come and gone below us. Alex was probably the most freaked out of any of us. He was totally convinced both events were correlated, spinning wild theories. He thought human traffickers had gotten the missing guy at first, then a Bigfoot once we heard the crashing, and now UFOs with the light vanishing. His theories were all over the place, but I just wanted to bounce some ideas off somebody, to articulate the strangeness I felt. Meanwhile, the ranger and the other guy in our group, a quiet man named Ben, had gotten ahead of us by about 100 yards. As we were hiking along, lost in our bizarre conversation, a loud, heavy sound emitted from the tree stand to our left. It wasn't the distant stomping from earlier. This was closer, more immediate. A distinct thudding followed by a rustling that suggested something large moving with significant force. Both our little groups immediately stopped. Alex and I started hustling to catch up, speed walking as quickly as the uneven terrain would allow us, an unspoken need to rejoin the main group. Just as we were closing the last 50 yards, both Alex and I stopped dead in our tracks again. There was another sound to our left, but this one was so much closer, so incredibly close, that only he and I could hear it. Someone or something, very faintly, from within the dense trees, whispered, "Hey." It was so quiet, a mere breath of a sound, and it was so clear, so distinctly formed. We had no choice but to freeze. Who was trying to get our attention at 1 in the morning, in the middle of nowhere, with such a disembodied whisper? We couldn't help but turn around and look. And here's where it gets a little speculative, because Alex and I didn't see the same thing. From where I was positioned, a few feet behind him, and to his right, my line of sight was partially obstructed by his body and some low-hanging branches. Alex had a direct, unobstructed view. We both stood there, frozen for a minute, our breath held, waiting for whatever had spoken to reveal itself. Then, without warning, Alex let out a sharp yelp, a cry of pure terror, and totally collapsed into the underbrush. He was backpedaling as fast as he could, scrambling on all fours like a frantic crab, trying to get away from whatever he had seen. His headlamp, bouncing wildly, cut erratically in every direction, casting chaotic shadows and preventing me from seeing anything further than his panicked fall. I rushed to help him to his feet, just as the ranger and Ben came running over, their own lights cutting through the darkness. Both of them had their guns drawn, clearly far more prepared for this kind of encounter than I was. They asked what happened, to which I just looked at Alex, then back at them and shrugged, completely at a loss. We explained the first part together, that we heard someone whisper, "Hey." Then, all three of us listened in silence as Alex recounted the rest. He said he had turned toward the trees after the whisper, his gaze sweeping back and forth along the trunks, expecting someone to step out from somewhere about 10 feet away, based on the sound of the voice. As he was looking, he saw movement, but nothing he expected. He said a person or something that resembled one began crawling on the forest floor, quickly and directly toward him. He described it as being only 5 or 6 feet away, right in front of him, looking straight up. He had seen their eyes reflecting on the light of his headlamp the whole time, but he had just thought it was sap reflecting off the bark. It wasn't. It was some muddled, naked, weirdly camouflaged creature. He said they blended into the dirt and pine needles perfectly, an almost unnerving natural camouflage. By the time he got to his feet, that person was gone, vanished back into the shadows as swiftly as it appeared. We did a sweep of the area, calling out a few more times, but found no sign of anyone. The weather was cool for the season, so a naked person like that would have had to have been on some kind of powerful drug. The only thing that could explain such bizarre, illogical behavior. The whole thing was crazy, because I sure as hell heard that whisper too, so it wasn't beyond the realm of possibility for there to be a person or something to go with that voice. After finding nothing, we kept pushing down the mountain, but now with a real, desperate drive to get the hell out of those woods. We were all but spilling over one another, a chaotic mass of arms and legs, each of us desperate not to be the last. No one wanted to be the one with the unknown darkness chasing behind them. The ranger radioed down, asking if there were any other missing persons in that area for the night. But of course, there was nothing. The mission was over. He didn't bother reporting whatever the volunteers saw. We all just agreed to tell them when we got back to the command post. It took us much less time now that we were practically huffing our way down the mountain. We didn't see anything else, and after we made our report, a second team was almost dispatched to go have a look. But ultimately, the order was called off. If there was anyone else, they'd have to be called in first. I never heard anything else about the light or that creepy crawler in the woods, but it sure made for one crazy, unforgettable night. The memory of that chilling whisper so close still has the power to raise the hairs on my neck, a testament to the profound and unsettling mysteries that lie hidden within the deepest parts of the wilderness. My life has always been deeply intertwined with the wild. I've worked as a pack trip outfitter, a ranch hand in the middle of vast national forests, and I've spent at least a week each month camping, immersing myself in the solitude of the backcountry. Now, I'm into dog mushing, which means I spend even more time outdoors, often in the colder, darker months, venturing into places where people rarely go. Most people would consider a 25-mile horse trip to be incredibly long, an all-day endeavor. But for me, training for the Iditarod and Yukon quest, I'll put in 40 to 80 miles a day with my dogs, just to get them into peak shape. I'm not directly with search and rescue or the park rangers anymore, but I volunteered alongside them both for countless hours, assisting deep within the wilderness. I've never met a person who logged these kinds of miles, who spent this much time truly alone in the vast remote places, who didn't see or hear some unbelievable stuff. It's par for the course, the strange occurrences, the unexplained phenomena. But just how much of it you entertain, how much you allow yourself to believe, is ultimately up to you. I don't believe in half the stuff I hear about. Mostly, I stick to what I see with my own eyes. My story, the one I'm going to tell you, is a two-part experience, both of which I saw with my own eyes. The first part happened just past the New Mexican border as I was driving into Arizona. I was on one of those old county highways, long, empty ribbons of asphalt stretching through vast, desolate landscapes. The sun had just slipped below the horizon, and the world was bathed in the eerie, deceptive light of dusk. It's that in-between time, when shadows lengthen and distances become harder to judge. A time when most accidents happen, especially with wildlife. I wasn't driving fast, just the speed limit, because I was truly in the middle of nowhere. If I clipped something out here, it would be a very long time before anyone found me, if I even survived the impact at all. My plan was to wait until the sun was totally gone, and the darkness would clearly outline any obstacles before picking up my speed. That's when it happened. 5 or 6 elk cows burst onto the road from the thick brush to my left, appearing out of nowhere like brown ghosts in the fading light. My foot slammed onto the brakes, and I swerved violently all the way off the shoulder, my tires spitting gravel. I almost collided with a jagged outcropping of rocks and a deep ditch along the roadside, desperate to avoid hitting this herd. It's almost a certain death sentence to collide with one of those animals. They stand 6 or 7 feet tall at the shoulder, weighing way over 500 pounds, and they breed like rabbits in some places. I might survive hitting one, but all 5? No way. Luckily, miraculously, I dodged the main group. But as I was swerving, my headlights caught a glimpse of something else, something far larger than the rest of the herd. This one, a singular creature, was bigger than all the others combined. It looked like it was going to hit me straight on, crashing through my front windshield, killing me instantly, just like I'd heard happen to some poor guy in Deming when he hit a horse. It was one of the worst deaths I could imagine. Hard, fast, and then just being crushed to death. The glass probably shredding me in the process. In that fleeting second, as the colossal form loomed in front of my car, I felt this really calm, almost serene feeling. A strange sense of acceptance washed over me, a thought that this would be the end. Everything felt slow, drawn out, as if time itself had warped. I got a good, clear look at it. It's so weird how natural it is to surrender when death feels unavoidable. Many of us have this idea that we're going to go out swinging, fighting to the last breath, but the truth is, sometimes, you just accept it when it's coming. The only truly scary part, the part that sent a shiver down my spine, even in that moment of strange calm, was that it was looking back at me too. Its head was massive, framed by the last vestiges of twilight, and its eyes, even from that brief distance, seemed to lock onto mine. This animal was about the size of a full-grown moose, towering over my little Ford Taurus. It had no antlers of any kind, and the build was unmistakably that of a typical female elk, albeit one of impossible proportions. The other animals were common elk cows, large but familiar. This one, however, was in a league of its own. It was covered from head to toe in what looked like incredibly large, shaggy, gray wool, like an Angora goat that needed shearing so desperately that its coat had started to resemble thick dreadlocks, matted and dense. And by larger, you have to understand the sheer dimensions I'm talking about. An elk can average 500 pounds, but a female moose averages closer to 900. This animal, lumbering along with the herd, was easily twice the size of any of those other animals. A true leviathan. To put it into perspective, the normal elk were already bigger than my car, but this creature literally took up every inch of the 2-lane road I was on. No wonder it was so hard to avoid. Luckily, miraculously again, I got past it. I felt the immense bulk of its head clear the roof of my shitty Ford Taurus, and then, with a sickening thud, its hindquarters hit the back of my car. The part one remember best, the detail that has stayed with me, is passing directly under it. For one instant, as its enormous body was directly above me, I felt this weird connection, a sense that we knew we were looking at one another, despite the dead, gray wads of matted fur that hung in its face, partially obscuring its features. I skidded to a stop and jumped out of the car immediately, adrenaline coursing through me, overriding my better judgment. I was standing there, awestruck, completely dumbfounded. I needed to see what in the world that thing was. The elk were already moving into the tree line, disappearing into the deepening gloom, and whatever I had seen was right behind them, vanishing into the thick brush. The silence that followed was unsettling, a void where the thudding hooves and my screeching tires had been. I walked back to the front of my car to inspect the place where I thought I'd hit it. Sure enough, there was a brand new massive dent right in the middle of my hood, a testament to the impossible impact. I leaned on my car, my hands on my head, for like 20 minutes, just replaying it over and over in disbelief. My friends, when I told them, think it was some kind of Sasquatch, even though I'm certain it had 4 legs, so we'll just call it Bigfoot's horse. My wife, ever the mystic, says it was probably the spirit of death itself, and that I died there but continued living on in what my mind wanted to happen. The second part of the story takes place a few years later, and roughly 900 miles away in Utah. I was a few miles up the ridge that overlooked Lake Strawberry. The trail led through an old aspen grove with really thick aspens on both sides. I mention this because, with a string of 12 dogs behind my TV, as there wasn't enough snow for the sleds yet, there was really nowhere to go but forward. You couldn't guide the dogs through trees like that, not without risking serious injury to them or yourself. So it was always forward, straight down the trail, until we got to the end of the loop that would bring us back to the main trail and then back to base camp. That thought was exciting because I was usually using a headlamp by this time, and it was late and cold. We'd more than accomplished the route I wanted to cover that day. Now it was just about getting back. Suddenly, I saw it again. It was running on my left side, keeping pace with us, but also closing in at an angle. If we kept going at the same speed, we would eventually collide. After about 50 yards, I was again reminded of the magnificent raw power of the moose. This thing was just barreling through 2 or 3 foot snowdrifts like they were nothing, its massive body pushing through the packed snow with astonishing ease. The amount of strength it showed was unreal. And the first thing that flashed through my mind, the detail that connected it instantly to my previous encounter, was that it was matted in that same thick gray fur as the one from Arizona. The other one, the one I saw in Arizona, was a few years before, and roughly 900 miles away. There was no way I was looking at that same specific creature I saw in the Arizona backcountry. This was a different beast, up here in the Utah high country. I wished I would have grabbed the camera, but I was caught up in the franticness of watching my dogs, making sure they didn't suddenly veer off and chase toward it. In dog mushing, you can never take your eyes off your leader too long, or something can go terribly wrong. And to stop the team would make them for sure go toward it, get caught in the trees. So really, the best thing you could do was just go faster. Keep the dogs busy. Give them something to focus on other than this impossible beast. This also meant I might put some distance between myself and whatever the hell that thing was. It still crashed through snowbanks and snapped branches as it galloped through the tundra alongside us. There were only about 25 yards between us and a few sparse trees, bare of any leaves or cover, giving me a clear view. I was looking at it, then back at the pack leader ahead of the team, then back at the creature. A fallen tree or a cattle guard taken too fast could injure a dog, just like a moose. I looked back at the creature again, then reached around for my emergency bag. I pulled out my just-in-case gun. It's a 6-shot, 357 revolver loaded with buffalo bore cartridges, powerful rounds for big game. I clicked off the first 2 chambers, which I always kept empty for safety, then rotated the cylinder until the gun was pointed straight up in the air, with live ammo now chambered. I really didn't want to shoot it, or even frighten the dogs with a gunshot, but it kept getting closer, its relentless pace unnerving. So, I fired a shot a few feet above it, aiming for the air. I heard the bullet hit some branches with a sharp crack, the sound echoing in the silent woods. I looked back at the dogs, making sure they weren't too spooked. Just as I did that, I saw it go behind a thick grove of trees in my periphery. I kept looking around, my eyes straining into the shadows, but that was the last I saw of it. The rest of the ride back to camp, I was jumping at every shadow, every rustle of leaves, every creak of the trees. As a hunter, a dog musher, and a volunteer search and rescue guide, I still don't know what to make of it. It's got 4 legs and what looks like decades worth of coat growth. It doesn't seem to need to be able to see clearly to move with such speed and power. It simply shouldn't exist, not in the way I saw it. Yet, I've seen it twice, separated by vast distances and years. It's crazy, but the craziest thing was that tiny moment in Utah when I thought, oh, it's death again. That this time, he's gonna take me for real. It was a fleeting, chilling thought, a silent acceptance of the impossible. and it left an indelible mark on my perception of what truly lurks in the wild, forgotten corners of the world. I worked in Big Bend National Park back when I was just out of college, during a summer break. It was a sprawling, rugged expanse in the western portion of Texas, dipping down along the bend of the Rio Grande that forms the border with Mexico. The park was a mix of high desert and smaller mountains, with a rich history woven into its ancient landscapes. For anyone unfamiliar, it's a place of stark, haunting beauty, where the sun beats down relentlessly and the nights are filled with the silent sweep of the stars. My job was part of a small team, preparing for a major backpacking series presentation sponsored by RIA, the outdoor equipment giant. This was a big event for them and other outdoorsy companies, mostly photographers who were going to come, test the latest equipment, and showcase their own work. Our primary task was to secure a large campsite for them, one that had to meet very specific parameters. Sweeping views of both the sunrise and sunset, proximity to flowing water, and crucially no other campers within 3 miles of their designated area. They wanted pristine, undisturbed wilderness. Since we worked in the park, we knew which places were usually busy, which were more easily accessed, and which campsites offered the best vantage points. We set out in a couple of teams to survey the potential areas, assessing each one against the strict criteria. Thankfully, it didn't take long to find a suitable location, leaving us with a free afternoon. Ray had offered to let us test some of their equipment, but beyond that, we were mostly uninvolved in the main event. We broke up into smaller groups based on our interests. Most of the team wanted to swim in the Rio Grande. A couple of guys were keen on fishing, and then there was a trail system nearby that I had been meaning to check out with my camera. That was where I decided to go. I was hiking the area near a place we had affectionately dubbed the Unknown Canyon. This name was due to a series of random weathered grave markers found along the canyon floor. Each was chiseled with a single date, followed simply by the words unknown person or unknown child. It sounds far more nefarious and sinister than it really was. Early roadmakers, when they were carving out pathways through the mountains, would occasionally discover ancient human remains that they accidentally disturbed while digging into the mountainside. Rather than scattering them into the elements, they took careful, respectful measures to relocate the remains to a beautiful, quiet little glen throughout the valley. This is why they had stone and mortar to make the headstones durable and lasting. It's a cool, somewhat creepy piece of the local history, a silent testament to lives long past. This was so long ago that I'm sure the canyon has a different, official name now, but for us, it was always the unknown. The area of the park opened up into a comparatively flat section of the basin, a wide expanse where the river broadened and the wildlife tended to be more diverse and obvious. It was a mild, safe area for me to poke around with my camera, less rugged than some of the other trails. I didn't have to worry about getting tripped up or needing a free hand to navigate tricky terrain. I even snapped a couple of atmospheric photos of the unknown gravestones that I came across, their ancient, weathered surfaces contrasting with the vibrant desert flora. I was several hundred meters away from our ranger truck, which was parked in a designated lot at what passed for our trailhead at the time. This particular area was open to guests and visitors, but it wasn't easily accessed by your average, casual hiker. You needed to know which creek to follow, then which faint game trail to splinter off from. And a portion of the descent into the basin was almost straight up and down if you didn't know how to properly navigate it. It was remote enough to feel truly wild, but not so remote that I felt entirely alone. As I approached the river basin near the mouth of the canyon, my eyes scanning the opposite bank, I saw something truly unusual. So unusual, in fact, that it took a few seconds for my brain to sort through the puzzle to make sense of the visual information. Something was moving on the other side of the river, and it was big, certainly man-sized, but it was moving very low to the ground as it shuffled along. The color of it, a mottled brown and gray, initially made me think it was a group of rabbits, perhaps startled and moving in a mass. But there was no way it was rabbits. It was far too big, too substantial, too deliberate in its movement. As I instinctively moved forward, a few cautious steps, trying to improve my visual on it, the form began to look even stranger. For a second, My mind, attempting to categorize the impossible, conjured the image of a medium-sized deer attempting to do the worm across the canyon floor. I must be hallucinating, I thought. There are no other options. My mind desperately sought a logical explanation for the bizarre sight. Only after blinking hard, several times, and refocusing my eyes, could I behold exactly what I was seeing, and the truth was far more terrifying than any hallucination. It was a mountain lion, a big cat. It was creeping along, low-slung, its powerful muscles rippling beneath its tawny fur, as it stalked something that was probably no more than a stone's throw from where I was standing, completely unaware of the approaching predator. I had never seen one in the wild before, only in pictures or distant glimpses. And when the visual information finally parsed in my brain, when the raw, primal reality of what I was witnessing truly sank in, I think my blood literally froze in my veins. Then, it looked at me. And I'll probably never forget that moment, that specific, chilling connection. Its head slowly swiveled, its large, intelligent eyes locking onto mine across the expanse of the river. You could almost see the little calorie calculator turn on in its eyes, a cold, predatory assessment. In that instant, I went from observer to potential prey. I've never been so thankful for a river in my entire life. Granted, at this time, and even maybe still, the river was very low due to prolonged drought and unauthorized, unlawful irrigation practices upstream. You could likely cross at several points at this location with very minimal risk. But to me, in that moment, it still appeared quite broad, and it definitely looked like a potent, immediate water barrier between me and the silent hunter. The cat did a series of double takes, its head shifting from me, then to the location of its intended prey, back and forth rapidly, weighing the risk versus the reward. I could actually see it in its deliberate, calculating movements, trying to get a fix on this evening's menu. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, so loud I was sure it could hear it across the river. I died a little inside, maintained my facing, never breaking eye contact, and began slowly and quietly moving away from it. Every step was deliberate, every motion carefully controlled, a primal instinct overriding conscious thought. I did have bear spray on my belt, a standard piece of equipment for backcountry rangers, but I had little to no confidence in its effectiveness when faced with such a powerful, focused predator. The sheer might and cunning of the mountain lion were overwhelming. I'm not sure if I wasn't worth the effort, or if the river truly was too much of a factor, or if the big cat just really wasn't that into me for dinner, but no chase was given. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to break the line of sight ducking behind a thick cluster of mesquite trees, and then I was able to get back to the van shaken, but unharmed with no sign of pursuit. That was the longest short walk I've ever taken in my entire life, every nerve ending screaming. Later on that night, after the sun had fully set and the desert was blanketed in an inky blackness, I was parked off the main park road in an area known for being prime hunting grounds for big cats. I'll always remember being parked there in the middle of nowhere, the vast, silent expanse of Big Bend surrounding me, munching on slightly stale Oreos and sipping from a bottle of water. The occasional growl or piercing scream of a big cat would peel out of the darkness, sharp and wild, cutting through the stillness of the night. Each sound was a stark reminder of what lurked just beyond the reach of my headlights, and I was profoundly thankful for my relatively fortunate position on our food chain, safely inside the confines of my vehicle. The experience instilled in me a deeper, more primal respect for the wildness of the desert, and the silent, deadly efficiency of its top predators. The memory of those calculating eyes, forever etched in my mind, served as a permanent reminder of the thin veil that separates human from nature, and just how easily that veil can be torn. I was on a day training hike with a group, spreading out naturally based on our individual hiking speeds. Our objective was to reach the next ranger station over, a familiar waypoint in the vast expanse of the park. I found myself in the middle of a group of 4. Suddenly, one of the others had to stop to pull a tick off their leg. The 2 remaining, one being our lead ranger, stayed with them, offering assistance and a moment to collect themselves. Ticks, my least favorite part of working outdoors. I decided to hike ahead, hoping to catch up with the lead group. The trail we were on was extremely well marked, so I wasn't worried about getting lost. I simply left them behind, driven by a primal fear of the tiny arachnids. In my mind, where there's one, there are 10,000 more, hanging invisibly in the leaves around you, waiting. Despite my choice of career and my love for the outdoors, ticks and leeches are some of my top fears. I didn't want to be the next one having to burn them off my neck and thighs, a thought that made my skin crawl. I knew the next landmark was an old logging road, and sure enough, I hit it about a half-mile later. It was a faint, overgrown track, running perpendicular to the main hiking trail, barely more than a wide deer path now, reclaimed by nature. I decided this was a good spot to wait for the rest of the group to catch up. While waiting, I decided to hike a bit down the old road, just to explore. There was a low stone wall along one side of it, ancient and covered in moss, and I found myself strolling alongside it, my eyes scanning the ground for anything interesting. Perhaps an old artifact, a forgotten tool from the logging days, or some unusual plant life. Then, all of a sudden, it happened. It felt like I just crossed this invisible line, a distinct, inexplicable boundary. The most immediate and striking sensation was the sound cutting off. Abruptly. No birds called, though moments ago multiple birds had been singing. No insects buzzed, though the air had been thick with their hum. Even the leaves on the trees around me stopped rustling, as if the wind itself had died in that precise spot. It was just a sudden, unnatural, deafening silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a remote forest. It was an oppressive, heavy void, an absence of all natural sound. For whatever reason, a strange curiosity mingled with a growing unease. I took a few more hesitant steps forward, and then I hit it, this invisible wall. I was suddenly barraged by this feeling, an intense, unwelcome sensation that pressed down on me from all sides. I can only describe it as if I de-entered the house of someone I knew who hated me, despised my very presence, but multiplied by 100. Every single hair on my body stood straight up, a primal alarm blaring through my nervous system. I stopped dead in my tracks. That feeling was so incredibly strong, so overwhelmingly hostile, that I didn't even want to turn my back on whatever was ahead. I couldn't see anything down the road, nothing threatening or otherwise that would visually confirm these overwhelming feelings. There was no growl, no movement, no shadow, just that crushing, malevolent silence and the profound sense of being utterly unwelcome. But I knew, with absolute, unwavering certainty, that I had to leave there immediately. I just knew I was not meant to be there. If I stayed, something bad, something utterly terrible would happen. It was an instinct so powerful it bypassed all rational thought. So, I started walking backward, slowly, deliberately, never turning away from the road, trying really hard not to even blink. My eyes darted from side to side, scanning the tree line, expecting something to materialize from the oppressive quiet. Each step backward felt like an eternity, a struggle against an unseen force that wanted me to stay. Finally, after what felt like an age, I crossed that invisible line again. The sounds immediately returned. I could hear the birds singing their cheerful songs, the insects buzzing, the leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. The oppressive dread lifted, replaced by the familiar, comforting sounds of the forest, and a wave of profound relief washed over me. I didn't turn around until I heard the voice of the lead ranger, the one I'd left earlier, asking me if there was anything cool down that road. My voice, when it came, was perhaps a little too eager. Nope, not a thing. Let's keep going. Looking back, I figured it was just a bear or a cougar, maybe out of sight, and my instincts had managed to pick up on its presence. That was the most logical explanation. But at the time, damn, it was just a really creepy feeling, almost paranormal. I let the rest of the team know, telling them briefly about the strange silence and the feeling of being watched. But everyone generally just let it slide. What were we going to do? Go hike around until we found it? There are animals in the woods. It's that simple. We reached the next station and had a really cool weekend learning about various plant life and field triage training. I completely forgot about that weird experience in the forest, and when anyone asked, I just said it was the time I thought I was close to a predator. It wasn't until the next summer, when I had to complete the same hike to that same station with a different team of rangers, that the memory resurfaced. Half of them were veteran park employees who had worked and lived in that park for more than 10 years. The hike was a breeze because all of us newbies got asked questions and hear wild stories about the park's history and its more unusual encounters. One of the older rangers, a grizzled, thoughtful man I'll call Rick, had a bunch of stories of run-ins with different predators. His accounts of eerie silences and heightened senses reminded me of my creepy experience in the woods the previous year. I spoke up and told my story, exactly how it happened. I explained that it occurred on this exact trail, how much it lined up with Rick's encounters, how everything got still, and how loud your own heartbeat sounded in the moment. But when I got to the part about the profound, unwelcome vibe, Rick didn't really comment. His usual conversational flow stopped dead. The conversation then got redirected by another ranger, and we started talking about something else entirely. I thought that was kind of weird. When I looked at Rick, he had this distant, faraway look in his eyes. He gave me this odd, almost knowing nod when he noticed me looking at him, a silent signal that we would talk later. Sure enough, when we reached the station and broke camp for that day, Rick came to find me. He apologized for clamming up earlier and explained he wanted to speak in private. I said okay, and we moved off, making a little distance between us and the rest of the group. The first thing he asked was where exactly I thought my story happened. I told him, pointing in the general direction of the old overgrown road. Rick told me he'd also explored that road in both directions over the years. One way was a dead end after about a quarter mile, where a massive rock slide had completely erased wherever the road once led. It looked more like an old stagecoach path with deep, matching ruts chewed into the earth, lost to time. Another year, he explored it the other way, the same direction I did. Rick said he followed the low rock wall until he found a nice place to relax for a bit, a quiet, shady spot. But he found himself overwhelmed with the exact same feelings of dread that I had described. It wasn't just silent and eerie, Rick said. It was like every fiber of his being was screaming at him to walk the other way, to flee. He got out of there, but he was way more perplexed about what he felt than I was. I'd never encountered predators up close before, so I didn't really know what to expect from instinct alone. Rick had, extensively. And this, he emphasized, wasn't like being near a bear or a mountain lion. It was different. It was like there was something in the air, not merely instinctual, but actually suggestive, somehow urging him to run. It reminded Rick of something he'd heard about years ago. Rick had served briefly in the U.S. Army before becoming a park ranger. During his service, he'd heard about various military technologies, a lot of them partially confidential because of their experimental nature. One thing he'd heard about was a non-lethal energy weapon called an access denial system. This was something that could be carried or installed somewhere, and it would emit waves at a certain frequency, designed to make any environment uninhabitable to humans. If one of these was placed above a doorway, for example, you would not be able to pass through it until it was turned off. You wouldn't be able to consciously tell why, but something would subconsciously keep you from wanting to enter, just like how we felt when we went down that road. Rick had always been fascinated with government technologies, and because he had a back catalog of knowledge, he was actually able to deduce exactly what we felt. He explained it in a way that clicked instantly for me. It did feel like a frequency, something all around me, an invisible pressure. When I stepped into it, my desire to go back the way I came was palpable, an overwhelming urge to retreat. I was excited. I asked him what we did next. Who could we take that information to? Who would believe us? I'll never forget the defeated half smile that he gave me as he patted me on the shoulder. He said there was nothing we could do. He tried once and gotten nowhere. At the end of the day, who do you take that kind of story to? The police? The press? There's no way to prove your story, and as you say it, you sound a little crazy. I was in complete disbelief, but his weary expression spoke volumes. He just wanted to compare notes with me and clue me in on what his theory was, that whatever was at the end of that old road was supposed to be classified. A secret government installation, perhaps a testing ground. Rick said there had been a number of people over the years making the same report about similar experiences. and no official investigation ever happened. Most of them were in the southwest, whereas we were a little farther north, but the pattern was undeniable. Either way, what did it matter? He also explained that investigating too much was a mistake. He'd heard a story or two where some of these folks who demade reports ended up disappearing after going back to see what was out there, consumed by their own curiosity. I only worked at the park for another year before transferring to a different region, but I've never forgotten what happened that day. The memory of that invisible wall and the chilling implications of what might have caused it still lingers, a constant reminder of the hidden, unknown forces that might be at play, even in the seemingly wild and untamed places we think we know. My job for a while was as a camp worker in a remote, privately run wilderness outpost. It was a simple life, demanding but rewarding. Other than myself, there was a Navajo guy my age working there too, a quiet, observant man I'll call Josh. Our responsibilities were straightforward: look after the horses, ensure the campers were settled, prepare simple meals, and keep the site meticulously clean for the next set of visitors. The company we worked for was serious about safety in the wilderness. We had emergency rifles set up in the main trailer we used as our base, along with 2 well-trained guard dogs. Their purpose to deter any large wildlife that might wander too close to the camp. Our most common visitors, other than the paying campers, were the forest rangers. They'd come by periodically, every couple of days at least, to check on long-term campsites and ensure everything was in order. We were on a first-name basis with these guys, and usually had a fresh pot of coffee waiting for them whenever their green truck rumbled into camp. Working so deep in the wilderness, it was nice to have some sporadic company. It almost made the isolation feel normal, a brief connection to the outside world. One night, after a long, dusty trail ride bringing horses back to their corrals, Josh and I got back to camp only to discover a single coyote patrolling the perimeter. It was lean, its fur a mottled brown, moving with an unnerving stealth. We watched it from a distance, hidden by the shadows, before it caught our scent or saw our shapes. Then, with a flicker of movement, it scurried off into the deepening twilight. I don't know why, but Josh had this really bad feeling after seeing it. He was usually so calm, so grounded, but a subtle unease settled over him. The other workers didn't really seem bothered. They were off-site, safe in their own cabins. But Josh and I were the ones who had to live on the site 24/7, completely immersed in the wilderness. Maybe it was just nerves or a heightened sense of awareness that comes from constant exposure, but both of us felt an inexplicable sensation of being watched that entire evening. The usual sounds of the night, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, seemed muted, replaced by an unsettling stillness that pressed in on us. Eventually, night fell, deep and black, and exhaustion from the long day finally claimed us. We both fell asleep in our small trailer, the guard dogs curled up near the door. Sometime around the darkest part of the night, perhaps 3 in the morning, we were jolted awake by a banging on our door. It was frantic, insistent, followed by the sound of someone wailing outside, a raw, tormented sound that cut through the silence of the night. We scrambled out of our bunks, hearts pounding. Josh, always the first to act, went to check the blinds. He saw it was a camper from one of the tents. He quickly let them in. They stumbled inside, completely terrified, their faces pale in the dim light of our lantern. They told us that one of the girls they were with had heard a sound, a cry that sounded exactly like one of her friends outside, hurt and in distress. She had stepped out of the tent, trying to help, only to be trampled on by something large and unseen. That's when the wailing had begun, a continuous, mournful cry that had woken all of them up. It had apparently gone on for 20 or so minutes before they finally mustered the courage to come and wake us up. As they were telling us this, the wailing outside abruptly stopped. A chilling silence descended, thick and heavy. Then, just as suddenly, it promptly started back up, but in a different spot. This time, it was much closer to our camping site, dangerously close to the tents. We noticed the dogs, usually so confident, were now with us, bristling, their hackles raised, a low, guttural growl rumbling in their chests, but their tails were tucked tight between their legs. They knew they were outgunned, outmatched by something unseen. Both of us, despite our training, were not feeling very brave. We took down the rifle, the familiar weight of the cold steel, a small comfort in the oppressive darkness, and exited the trailer. We brought the dogs with us, leashed, letting them lead us towards the center of camp. From here, you could tell the sound was coming from just beyond the edge of our lantern light, where the area was pitch black, an impenetrable wall of trees and shadows. We quickly gathered some of the dry wood sitting next to us and started the campfire back up, hoping its light and warmth would offer some protection. That's when it got truly bad. I've never been more terrified in my life than I was right now. As soon as the wood caught, sparking and crackling, and the fire began to blaze, the wailing, which had been all around us, abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was absolute, heavier than anything I had ever experienced. The dogs just stood next to us, still growling, a low, constant rumble, but their tails remained tucked tight. They knew they were outgunned. I had absolutely no idea what was going on. What kind of creature could make such sounds and then vanish so completely? So, out of pure instinctual fear, I chambered around into my rifle. Josh, seeing my action, followed suit, the metallic click of his own rifle echoing in the unnatural quiet. After that, it went dead quiet. And I mean dead quiet. Like no sound being heard whatsoever. Not a whisper of wind, not a rustle of leaves, not a single chirp from an insect. It was a suffocating, unnatural stillness. I don't know if it was from how scared I was, or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but the next thing I knew, I heard my name being whispered. It came from the tree line to my left, a soft, insidious sound, like a breath of wind shaping itself into my name. I'll fully admit it, I pissed my pants. It was, and still is, the most terrifying moment of my entire life. I looked at Josh. His face was pale, his eyes wide with the same horror that gripped me. He was looking between me and where my name had come from, just as terrified as I was, maybe, if not more. We both backed up, slowly, deliberately, closer to the campfire, its flames now dancing high, providing a flickering bastion of light in the overwhelming darkness. Then, Josh did something unexpected. He took one of the burning branches from the fire and hurled it towards the tree stand, a flaming arc of light against the black. At this point, what few campers had followed us out into the dark were completely losing their minds. A couple of them, closer to us, had heard the voice as well and saw us tossing flaming branches into the shadows, rifles raised. They could all tell something was very, very wrong. I looked back at them for only a second, just in time to see them backpedal, scrambling into the trailer, and then slam the door shut. Not very cool, but I understood. Pure, unadulterated fear. We heard a weird sound then, a rustle and a low growl from where the flaming branch had landed, and saw something scurry away. Immediately, the dogs went completely ballistic, a cacophony of barks and snarls. If there was anything left in my bladder at that point, it had come out. Just as I began to take a hesitant step forward, trying to make sense of the chaos, I heard another voice. This time, it whispered Josh's name. It came from straight ahead, from deeper within the tree line, and it even said his full name, clear and distinct. I looked at Josh, but we were both frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. His eyes, wide with terror, suddenly focused. He pointed at something, a tall, shadowy figure slowly making its way toward us, emerging from the dense foliage. Without another thought, he pointed his rifle and fired at it, hitting whatever it was with a sickening thud. After that initial shot, we kind of went crazy, a surge of adrenaline overriding our fear. We just started firing at whatever made a sound inside that brush, at any shadow that seemed to shift, any rustle that wasn't the wind. The thing that we saw stalking out of the foliage was tall, person-sized, moving with a strange, deliberate gait. Everything we thought we saw after that, after the initial figure, seemed to be crawling, low to the ground. We stayed outside of the trailer for the rest of that night, rifles clutched in our trembling hands, the fire our only comfort against the oppressive darkness, until the other camp workers came up at dawn. They saw us both, tired, faces streaked with grime, still clutching the rifles, and asked what the hell had happened. We went over everything, the wailing, The whispers, the shots fired into the darkness. They went out to investigate. One of them had a radio and contacted the forest rangers, who were thankfully already on their way for a routine check-in. Their green truck came bumping out of the forest no more than an hour later. By noon, the rangers came back, their faces grim. They had found 2 dead coyotes. Apparently, what had happened was the current set of campers had brought a large amount of meat to grill with, but hadn't properly sealed the containers, attracting the coyote pack. I definitely had some fantastical things going through my brain during the night, ranging from skinwalkers to ghosts. So to see the actual creature causing it all was completely surreal, almost anticlimactic. But then the forest rangers noted the strangest part. One of the coyotes was very clearly dead from a massive bullet hole in its side, undoubtedly from one of our rifles. The other coyote, however, didn't have any visible wounds, definitely no bullet holes. Its face was locked in a crazy snarl, eyes wide with terror, and all of its muscles were tense to the point of rigidity. It looked like it had just dropped dead during the onslaught, perhaps from sheer terror, but with no physical explanation. Josh was particularly spooked when he saw them and refused to tell me why. I suspect it had something to do with his personal beliefs, possibly Navajo culture, and its connection to shapeshifters, but I don't want to assume. The only thing he told me, his voice low and firm, was that there should be a 3rd corpse. The big, standing thing he shot right in the chest, he said, but there was nothing around. Coyotes can't talk. We both clearly heard our names whispered that night. The amount of gore throughout the area was unbelievable. Blood and innards painted the ground, the bushes, and even up and down the trees. It looked like there'd been something among the pack, fighting them, tearing them apart. Maybe that's what actually got them into such a frenzy, a desperate battle for survival against an unknown entity. The rangers took down a report, but they never got back to us with any more information. To this day, the memory of that night, the impossible whispers, and the coyote with no wounds remains a chilling mystery that defies any rational explanation. In 2016, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and I decided to go camping in eastern Pennsylvania. We loved the idea of primitive camping, no crowds, no facilities, just us and the wild. The place we decided to stop for the night was exactly that. Primitive, free, with absolutely no cell phone service, and barely even a proper road leading to it. It had been raining recently, so everything was muddy. The narrow track leading off the main road was a slick ribbon of muck, and the ground was soft and spongy underfoot. We were looking for the driest possible spot for our tent. As we navigated the winding, rutted path, we did encounter 2 other people. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but at the time, they certainly added a layer of unease to the beginning of our trip. The first was a woman. Her truck was pulled off to the side of the road, the hood open as we slowly drove past. She seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer help. Usually my boyfriend, always the helpful type, would have no problem pulling over. But this time, he said, something about her just put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help. Her posture was too relaxed, her gaze too deliberate. Usually, people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach, their faces etched with concern or desperation. She, however, looked like she was just expecting that we would stop. At least, that's what my boyfriend said. I honestly didn't notice anything particularly strange about her at the time. Just another stranded motorist. The next unsettling encounter came after we had chosen our spot and were setting up a fire for some hot dogs. It was a secluded clearing, surrounded by tall, dense trees, with a small, trickling stream nearby. I noticed the car drive by slowly, then again a few minutes later. My boyfriend, with his sharper eye for detail, pointed out that each time it was the same car, and the same man behind the wheel, watching us each time he passed. He made a deliberate point to turn his head and stare. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this. We discussed it, our voices low. But we had driven around for a while already, squelching through the mud, before finding a place that we truly liked, one that offered some dry ground. The road was so muddy. If we wanted to find us again if we moved, All he had to do was follow the fresh tracks our car had left. There were some other older tracks, but not really many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us once more. He didn't come by another time though, so we stayed, pushing the unease aside. We spent the several remaining hours before dark just goofing off, enjoying the quiet, building our campfire, and not seeing anyone else drive by. Whether or not those two encounters had anything else to do with the real fear that came later, I couldn't say for sure. But the real terror began sometime around 3 a.m. We had settled into our tent, the canvas providing a thin barrier against the vast darkness of the woods, and had fallen asleep. We were violently awoken by this very loud, mechanical noise. I can't describe it very well, or even remember exactly what it sounded like beyond a feeling of intense, unnatural grinding. But my boyfriend, moments later, whispered that it reminded him of a chain gun revving up, a heavy, metallic, industrial roar. Another way he tried to describe, it was similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel, amplified to an impossible degree, and played it over a loudspeaker directly outside our tent. The sound was deafening, vibrating through the ground and the very air. He jumped up, wide awake and instantly alert, and looked out our little mesh window, but he couldn't really see anything beyond the immediate, shadowy outlines of the trees. The sound repeated itself a few more times, a terrifying crescendo and then a grinding, metallic fading. I was too scared to speak, paralyzed by the sheer volume and alien nature of the noise. My boyfriend whispered, trying to reassure me that it was probably miles off, echoing through the valley, and just to go back to sleep. I didn't question him at the time. I figured loud sounds could easily be heard miles off in the silent wilderness. But after we ended up leaving, he told me that it actually had been coming from just down the road, terrifyingly close, but he didn't want to freak me out more than I already was. Looking back, I probably should have wondered why he would bother to whisper if that sound was truly far off. I was still terrified though. Every little thing I heard outside after that, every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch, sounded like someone was walking stealthily around the tent, just outside our fragile canvas wall. We lay there for a little while longer, perhaps 20 minutes, listening to the strange silence, my heart pounding in my ears. Finally, my boyfriend, his voice low and urgent, told me to get dressed because we were leaving immediately. The words themselves alarmed me, but I grew even more alarmed when he quietly, deliberately, unwrapped the machete that we had brought for this trip from its plastic sheath. He checked the blade, then exited the tent, his silhouette a grim shape against the fainter darkness outside. We quickly packed up, working in a silent, frantic rhythm, stuffing our sleeping bags and pads into their sacks, folding the tent as fast as we could. The air was thick with unspoken fear. Then, we loaded the car, my hands fumbling with the latches on the trunk. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, straining my eyes in the moonlight that now filtered through the trees. Despite the moon providing plenty of light, I really couldn't see any distinct, fresh tracks beyond our own. But I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed before we got back into the car. There was a single empty beer can, a generic brand we didn't drink, sitting by our dead campfire. It hadn't been there before we went to sleep. We hadn't even brought beer on the trip. The realization sent a fresh wave of cold dread through me. Someone had been there while we were asleep, watching us. While driving away, my boyfriend explained that he had been nervous that someone might have been trying to lure us out with the loud noise, and he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away to show immediate panic. He also half expected to find our gas tanks siphoned dry, a common tactic for stranded individuals in remote areas. But that wouldn't have stopped us because thankfully, we had a hybrid car. We even joked nervously that it would make a funny hybrid commercial. Number of brutal murders avoided by driving a hybrid. I think joking was the only thing keeping us from ourselves, from succumbing to the overwhelming fear and the adrenaline that was still coursing through our veins. On our way out, trying to navigate the muddy, unmarked roads in the dark, we did get a little lost. The primitive track twisted and turned, disorienting us further. It ended up taking a lot longer to get back to the main forest road than we anticipated. We ended up passing into the national forest, which I guess we were in the whole time, and then stumbled upon a ranger station. The light was on, a beacon in the darkness, and we desperately needed directions anyway. So, feeling a rush of relief at the sight of authority, I decided to pull in and report what had happened to us. The rangers were friendly enough, their faces kind and understanding despite our disheveled appearance. They totally understood our concern. In fact, they'd been having a number of people stop in with similar accounts. When we explained where we had come from and had set up camp, they said it made sense. That particular area of the forest was easily more accessible from the highway despite its wild appearance. So it was known for less than desirable activity, a magnet for those who sought the anonymity of the wilderness for their darker purposes. They didn't offer any concrete explanations for the sound or the beer can, but their acknowledgement of similar incidents was chillingly validating. We thanked the rangers and then went on our merry way, our plans for primitive camping completely abandoned. The rest of our trip, we only stayed in well-populated campsites within sight and sound of other people, or just splurged on a comfortable hotel room needing the solid walls and locked doors as a barrier against the unseen horrors we had encountered in the dark, silent woods. I have always found a deep connection with the natural world. My formal education was in geology, a field that allowed me to understand the Earth's ancient processes, its silent, slow changes. But my true calling, the place my heart ultimately led me, was to become a park ranger. I work in a sprawling, beautiful wilderness in the southeastern part of the United States. It's a place of quiet grandeur, where tall, straight pines whisper secrets to the wind, and the landscape remains largely untouched by human hands. This serene isolation, this pure beauty, was everything I had ever wanted in life. Yet, as the seasons turned and years accumulated, the isolation sometimes weighed on me. My only regular companions were the occasional visitors who passed through, or the fleeting memories of my college days. Of course, the ranger life also brings its own kind of community. I'd be dishonest if I said I didn't form a few friendships over the years. I'm naturally quite an introverted person, and many of the other rangers I met were boisterous, almost like overgrown college students. But I did manage to find some quiet folks who enjoyed hiking and fishing as much as I did. For the most part, though, my days were spent carrying out my duties and embracing the solitude of the vast forests. I've been out in these fields, protecting this land, for more than 2 decades now. About 10 years ago, a particular encounter stood out. An elderly couple approached my station, and something about them immediately caught my attention. They weren't like the usual tourists who came and went, snapping photos and rushing through. There was a profound sense of history in their eyes, a deep, gentle longing that seemed to radiate from them. They explained they had traveled all the way from the western states, drawn back to this park because it held a cherished memory from many, many years ago. They had gotten engaged here a lifetime ago and were now seeking a specific spot, a fragment of their past preserved within a faded sepia-toned photograph. Time, however, is a relentless sculptor, and the landscape had changed significantly over the decades. What was once easily recognizable in their old photo was now transformed. They were, understandably, a little lost. Their story, told with quiet dignity and a hint of wistful sadness, truly moved me. I immediately offered to help them. We spread the old photograph across my desk, their wrinkled hands tracing the blurred outlines of trees and rocks, their voices soft and trembling with anticipation as they pointed out familiar landmarks. I could see the youthful hope and love still reflected in their aged faces. It was a beautiful thing to witness. I escorted them in my sturdy park vehicle, the silence inside broken only by their soft whispers, and the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath the tires as we drove deeper into the park. The last part of the journey involved a short hike, the forest floor echoing with the rustle of leaves under our boots. When I say I escorted them, what I really mean is that they followed closely behind in their own Toyota 4Runner. I wasn't about to lead 2 city slickers deep into the wilderness without their own means of getting back out. But this couple was different. They had proper hiking boots and a 4-wheel drive vehicle, clear signs that they took off-road travel seriously. Still, I remained cautious about how far I would guide them. It was still early afternoon, and my regular duties for the day were finished, so I had the time. We spent a good hour or so bouncing along a rough track on the backside of a large basin near the river. I was fairly certain their spot had to be in this area. My geological training kicked in. I studied their old photograph intently, noting the unique rock formations, the specific types of trees, and the way the earth dipped away into the river. This area matched all the subtle clues. It was a perfect match, a dead ringer, and I knew we had to be close. And sure enough, I was right. I had literally nailed it. We parked our vehicles side by side, and then hiked down a short, winding ravine that led us very close to the water's edge. And there it was, nestled in an earthy, secluded pocket of the landscape, looking exactly like the scene in their decades-old photograph. I went down first, carefully extending a hand to help the wife, whose steps were a bit unsteady, and then her husband. They were absolutely overjoyed, their faces alight with a childlike wonder. We had found the spot, a picturesque bend along the river, bathed in the soft golden glow of the late afternoon sun. It was a perfect setting, timeless and serene. I left them there, two figures silhouetted against a vibrant, dying light, a poignant image of timeless love. It was incredibly moving to me that they had undertaken such a journey, not just the physical miles across the land, but a journey through the very fabric of time itself. They were here, in this quiet corner of the world, to fulfill a promise, to revisit their younger selves, to honor their deepest devotions of love. I know it might sound sentimental, even a little foolish, but it was precisely this kind of profound human affection. Affection for the land, for mankind, for every fleeting, beautiful moment that had swayed me to become a park ranger in the first place. My heart beats hard for these moments, for these connections. It's a bleeding heart kind of sentiment, but it's how I genuinely feel. As I began my return journey to the main station, a strange and subtle unease began to creep over me. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but something just felt off. They had explained their intentions clearly. They wanted to spend the afternoon in that sacred old area, retake some photos, and simply bask in the memories. For the most part, this was typical visitor activity. But for whatever reason, the energy of that elderly couple, the quiet intensity of their presence, carried a different kind of weight, a subtle tremor that resonated deeply within me. By the time I arrived back at my post, I had convinced myself that I had somehow messed up. A cold wave of regret washed over me, a poor feeling for a park ranger to have, like I had somehow failed in my duty, endangered them in some unseen way. I decided to wait for them. I felt an overwhelming need to ensure they would leave safely. Night fell over the park and everything was bathed in an eerie, profound silence. The other day trippers, the casual visitors, trickled out like sand through an hourglass, their car lights fading into the distance. But as the official closing hour approached, all traffic choked off into nothing. Not even a single straggler's headlight bumped along in the distance. I called the other check stations in the surrounding areas, hoping for news, but I only received vague reports. No one could confirm that an elderly couple and a Toyota 4Runner had exited the park. The couple hadn't left. I could feel it deep in my bones, a terrifying certainty. Never since that day have I had such an undeniable gut feeling. Anxiety gnawed at me, a cold, sharp ache in my stomach. I left my assistant to manage the entrance station, giving them instructions to contact me immediately if the couple somehow appeared. Then, I retraced the long, winding drive back into the canyon, the same route I had taken them earlier. The darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. There wasn't a soul in sight, save for a couple of overnight campers whose presence we already knew about. They had the proper permits and paperwork, their tents a distant, quiet glow. I bumped along the rough road, the beam of my headlights cutting through the inky blackness, until I reached the drop-off point where we had parked earlier. And there it was, the 4Runner, sitting in the utter darkness. Its presence was chilling, an unnatural stillness that made my palms sweat. I remember my mouth suddenly becoming over-salivated, like my glands were about to go haywire, and I was about to be sick with fear. My fingers trembled so violently I could barely shift my vehicle into park. I killed the engine, but left my headlights on, their beams piercing the gloom. It was profoundly dark out there, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that I was going to need help, all the help I could get to find them. I stumbled out of my vehicle, the ground feeling unstable beneath my feet. I walked to the edge of the ravine, peering into the darkness. For a moment, I lost my nerve. I just stood there, waiting, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Their car was here. That meant I knew what I was about to find. And it was probably something bad. I called out a few times, my voice sounding weak, and lost in the vast silence, hoping, desperately hoping, that perhaps I was wrong. Maybe they had just wandered a little off course, or maybe they couldn't make the short climb back up to the car. Only silence answered me. A profound, heavy silence. So, I took a deep, shuddering breath, mustered all the courage I could find, and began the descent down to the shore of the river. The sight that greeted me was, paradoxically, as beautiful as it was horrifying. The moonlight, filtering through the sparse canopy of trees, helped me out a bit, casting an ethereal glow on the scene. I could make out two forms sprawled out on the dirt below a large, ancient tree, their legs pointed vaguely toward the water. At first glance, it looked almost as if I had disturbed them, as if they were just bundled up, cuddling peacefully beneath the endless stars overhead. "Hey, Ranger District here," I called out softly, my voice barely above a whisper. They didn't move. My heart hammered. I took another quaking breath, trying to steady myself, and then lit the scene up fully with my powerful flashlight. There they lay, spooning on the riverbank, utterly motionless. Their faces were serene, a strange and unsettling peacefulness etched into their features. A profound sense of finality hung in the cold night air, an almost tangible weight. They were both dead, but the most unsettling thing was that they didn't look scared or miserable. It was the weirdest experience, coming upon them like that, after having that chilling premonition earlier that this would be their fate. They clearly hadn't been murdered. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing disturbed. This, by the look of it, was some kind of planned shared farewell. I seriously doubted they both simply dropped dead of strokes or heart attacks at the exact same moment in that exact position. My mind reeled in a whirlwind of confusion and sorrow. My hands shaking, I pulled out my radio and called the local authorities. The hours that followed were a blur of flashing lights, hushed conversations among officers, and a deep, overwhelming sadness that settled over the entire scene. The police eventually disclosed their identities, but little else at that moment. It was only later, much later, that I learned the heartbreaking truth of the matter. The wife had been terminally ill, her life slowly but relentlessly being claimed by cancer. They had chosen, together, to end their lives in the place where their journey had begun, the place where their love story first took root. That news hit me hard, a heavy blow to my chest. But amidst the sorrow, I found a strange, quiet solace in the thought that they were at peace, together in death, just as they had been in life. They hadn't asked for my help in their final act because they didn't want to implicate anyone else, didn't want to drag anyone into their profound personal decision. Their final deliberate act was a testament to their love, a love so profound, so all-encompassing, that they chose to embrace death in a place, etched deeply into their shared memory beneath the vast, indifferent, and yet somehow tender sky. Their story, though undeniably tragic, touched me deeply. It was a stark, poignant reminder of the transience of life, how quickly our time here can pass, and yet also of the enduring, unbreakable power of love. To this day, as I walk the quiet trails of the park, beneath the towering trees and along the winding, murmuring river, I will always remember them. Two souls who found their final resting place in a beloved corner of the world, leaving behind a story that continues to echo in the profound silence of that wilderness. It is a story I carry with me, a quiet, beautiful sorrow, a testament to the mysteries and profound depths of the human heart, found in the quiet heart of the wild. I'm not a forester by trade, but I have a tale that always seems to send a shiver down my spine. It involves my cousin, Sarah, who works as a forest ranger in the vast, rugged wilderness of the Montana-Wyoming border, specifically around the Bridger-Teton National Forest. This story centers on a strange discovery we made deep in the heart of that immense, untamed land. Sarah, a hydrologist by training, spends a lot of her time venturing into the most remote corners of the forest. Her job involves collecting samples from streams and testing snow runoff for contaminants, ensuring the water quality remains pristine. The idea of joining her on one of these expeditions always sounded thrilling to me. So, one summer, I decided to go along. We packed all our gear into durable saddlebags, preparing to camp out in the wilderness for 2 full nights. Sarah, of course, was accustomed to this. It was her regular routine. She was tough, like nails, and never batted an eye at the thought of sleeping alone in the middle of nowhere. For her, it was just part of the job. I grew up camping and roughing it too, so I was comfortable in that environment. Still, there was something about the sheer isolation of this particular trip that put me a little on edge. We were going to be very far from any semblance of civilization. No help would be nearby, no family, no familiar sights. It would just be Sarah and me, surrounded by miles and miles of wild, unforgiving woodland. The first day unfolded like something out of a dream. The scenery was truly breathtaking. The air, crisp and pure, felt almost intoxicating. The profound tranquility of the wilderness was a sharp contrast to the constant noise and rush of city life I was used to. I fell in love with that area instantly, wishing I could visit more often. That first day, however, was mostly dedicated to Sarah's work. The first half of the day involved a lot of hiking back and forth along various streams, taking samples, then backtracking to collect more. She kept all the collected water samples in an absolutely massive, almost indestructible hard case. Once she was satisfied with her work and had shown me all the intricate details of her job, she took me around for some sightseeing, leading me to various beautiful lookout points that offered sweeping views of the valleys below. Eventually, the day began to fade. The setting sun painted the sky in rippling oranges and purples as we hiked back to our camp. It truly felt like being in a movie, so far removed from people, cars, and any hint of civilization. Some of the trails we used were incredibly thin, barely discernible paths, and I wondered if they were even meant for humans. Sarah explained that she often utilized a network of game trails that wound their way high up the side of the mountain. We settled into our camp, enjoying a splendid dinner of simple sandwiches and crunchy chips, along with some pasta salad we kept in a small cooler. Everything tasted incredible after a day of hiking. Sarah took the time to tell me more about the area. She confirmed my suspicions. Very little recreation happened up here. No roaring engines, no cars, no off-road vehicles. This was a cool, quiet slice of wilderness that people simply didn't explore very often. It was almost always silent, but she mentioned there was occasional evidence of human traffic, some old, some more recent. Sometimes, she would find shell casings scattered way out in the middle of nowhere, some rusted with age, others brand new and shiny brass. It was weird, she admitted, but not so weird that it ever kept her up at night. Tomorrow will be a fun day, she told me with a slight smile. We'll pack up camp, and then I'll take you around to the old haunts. There's something weird I want to show you, and I think you'll find it interesting. With that, we turned in for the night. As I drifted off to sleep, visions of what strange things might be in store for me danced in my head. On the second day, after we had finished our camp chores, Sarah turned to me with a mischievous glint in her eye. You ready to see it now? She asked, her voice full of intrigue. I nodded eagerly. She then did something I had never seen her do before. She got out a shoulder pack, a single sling setup, and began to fill it with all kinds of unique equipment. There was a length of rope, a powerful flashlight, a compact first aid kit, a large, intimidating knife, and a small black pistol I hadn't even known she carried. She told me it was a 9mm Beretta, and she took it everywhere with her when she was deep in the wild. With the pack secured, she led us off in a new direction, one we hadn't explored yet. We descended into a deep ravine, which then led into a narrow gulch. It was almost like someone had deliberately dug a trench along the side of the mountain. A detail I forgot to mention earlier was that Sarah had brought a few horses with her for this particular job. She used them to reach some of the more distant locations where she needed to test water. I wasn't much of a rider myself, so she had me saddle up behind her, and she took us across the rugged mountain face on her best horse, a sturdy, calm mar. At the end of this secluded fold in the land, we dismounted and tied our horses in a picturesque clearing. Sarah then instructed me to follow a narrow wildlife path, handing me a rechargeable radio. It was a compact device, capable of being hand-wound for power, and it also doubled as a small lantern if needed. This was her subtle way of telling me to stay alert and pay attention without explicitly saying, "Be careful, this might be dangerous." If she was handing me special equipment, I knew we were entering a truly deep and isolated part of the wilderness where not just typical predators, but perhaps something worse might lurk. I scanned the area, feeling a prickle of unease, and followed her instructions. As I ventured down the path, I stumbled upon a sight that was utterly out of place in the middle of this vast wilderness. A large coil of thick, insulated wire, similar to the 10 or 12 gauge wiring used in houses, protruded from the ground. I stopped, completely dumbfounded. How on earth could this be out here? Then it hit me. This must be what my cousin was talking about. The weird, creepy thing she wanted to show me. I felt a mix of uncertainty and a slight disappointment, as I was kind of expecting something way bigger and scarier. I realized it probably wasn't even attached to anything, so I grabbed the wire and pulled. To my surprise, it was so firmly inserted into the earth that it didn't give an inch. I knelt down and dug in the soil a bit, finding that the wire entered a sturdy tube that sheathed it, protecting it from rocks and other things that could damage it. It was in that moment that I knew this cord actually went somewhere, but being on the side of a mountain, I had no idea where that somewhere could be. What do you think? Sarah asked as she came up behind me, her eyes twinkling slightly. Really weird, I replied, still examining the wire. Do you have any idea where it goes? Nope, none of us do, she said, shaking her head. Some of the other rangers told me I'd find this out here. She paused, then added, I didn't think anything of it until I found the desk. It's got to be a hoax of some kind, right? Probably some old joke from when crews were running power lines through here, if they ever even did. Sarah nodded, then shrugged. Then she told me the story. The wire, she explained, wound its way through the underbrush, strung across tree limbs, snaked around ancient rocks, and finally terminated into an actual electrical outlet mounted on the side of a desk. The desk, reminiscent of the old, heavy wooden ones from my school days, stood completely alone in the wilderness. There was no chair, no building, nothing else around it. Just a lone desk with a live electrical outlet. Confused and curious, I watched as Sarah pulled out the portable radio she had given me and plugged it into the outlet. To our utter astonishment, the radio immediately lit up. A low static filled the air, then cleared slightly, and a faint murmur of a distant radio station became audible. We were miles away from civilization, with no road access, no buildings, and certainly no people for miles around. Yet we had found a live electrical outlet. The wire was being fed from somewhere, a source unknown and unseen. It was an enigma, a lone, powered desk in the absolute middle of the woods. I truly regret not taking a picture of it. It was a sight as eerie as it was inexplicable. When Sarah first got this job, about 2 or 3 years prior, the other rangers had told her she'd eventually find a live cable out there when she went to take samples for the very first time. She had found the cable, just as they said, and followed it to the desk. When she mentioned the desk to her colleagues back at the station, they all laughed, convinced she was making it up, playing a prank. But she wasn't. She even had photos to prove it. The other rangers were so blown away by the evidence that they all planned a hike out there together, just to see the bizarre thing for themselves. Sure enough, it was still there, exactly as she had described. There were no spooky jump scares when we approached it, no hidden bodies, just this one inexplicable anomaly in the heart of the wilderness. It was a stark reminder that even in the most serene and picturesque settings, there are mysteries that defy all explanation, stories that can genuinely unsettle us, reminding us of the inexplicable world we truly live in. I wonder who carved that, I asked her, pointing to the surface of the desk. There, in the blotchy wood grain, a message had been chiseled. It said, "Go away for good," in big, bold print, meticulously etched to be crystal clear. Sarah leaned over to take a closer look. As I watched, all the color seemed to drain from her face. She said that carving had not been there before. She had just been in this area, at this very desk, only 3 months prior for another survey. She had never seen anyone else in the area, ever, in all her years with the Forest Service. We lingered there for a bit, listening to the woods, scanning the surrounding trees for any sign of movement, any hint of another presence. Nothing stirred, though. The silence was absolute. Sarah then radioed into her office, letting them know she was finished with her samples and that she would be expecting her regular relief crew back at the ranger station. The sudden, slightly different tone of her voice on the radio, compared to her usual calm reports, told me for sure that something truly weird was now going on. We made the long, slow slog off the mountain, our horses and equipment intact, until we finally linked up with our truck and trailer. Then, we rumbled our way back towards civilization. As we got closer, we started to see campers, hikers, and fishermen along the winding creek. They all waved and smiled, seemingly happy to see a peacekeeper so far out in the sticks. I had this weird, persistent thought, though, about that desk sitting up in that hidden gulch, all those miles deep in the mountain. I imagined someone sitting there, perhaps watching all the oblivious tourists use the recreation sites in the forest below. It reminded me of some strange mystery from a TV show, something unsettling and unexplained. We made it back without any further issues, and Sarah and I never really spoke of the desk again. She still works for the Forest Service, but she has since moved on to other areas in the state, perhaps seeking new mysteries or simply a new uncarved and unpowered patch of wilderness. I'm sure that desk is still sitting up there, though, surging with power for no discernible reason at all. And that, dear listeners, is the end of today's tale. A lone desk, a live outlet, and a wilderness that holds secrets we may never unravel. Until next time, remember, not all is as it seems when you venture into the heart of the wilderness. I'm not a professional ranger, but my past isn't far off. I was part of a group akin to the Scouts, an organization that will remain nameless. A band of young adventurers who spent countless hours immersed in the embrace of the woods. The wilderness was our playground, our classroom, and sometimes it truly felt like our second home. We definitely encountered our fair share of oddities and strange occurrences that would send chills down your spine. Most of these, I eventually found, had some kind of rational explanation. Yet, there was this one incident, one chilling memory that still haunts me, a night of terror that remains etched deeply in my mind. My official job title wasn't camp ranger, but I was a seasonal leader in charge of various groups of kids, usually between the ages of 8 and 16. We ran this large facility, nestled deep within the woods, and it took a lot of dedicated people to keep everything safe and operating smoothly. There were many moving parts to a place like this, especially when you never knew what some curious kid might find or do. Plus, there were always local trailblazers and other individuals who sometimes wandered onto our property, so we had to be constantly vigilant about who came and went. As a leader for the 8 to 10-year-old age group, I was responsible for their safety, their learning, and most importantly, their fun. One of the highlights of the season was our annual camping trip, a cherished tradition that involved bonding and adventure. This particular year, however, was different. It was our first time setting up camp on a new terrain, a vast expanse of wilderness that stretched as far as the eye could see. Usually, we would scout out the entire area thoroughly before the kids arrived, marking out any potential hazards and mapping emergency escape routes. But this time, the sheer size of the place made it practically impossible to do a comprehensive survey. The main facility itself was pretty luxurious. Everyone slept in sturdy log cabins. We had a large mess hall, running water, all the modern comforts. The camping trips, though, were a different experience entirely. The rangers and team leaders would gather their groups, pack everything they would need for the weekend onto their backs, and then trek out into the middle of nowhere. This was where the true camping experience came into play. We could actually teach the kids how to genuinely rough it, how to live off the land, at least for a couple of nights. Every camp has its own traditions, and ours was no different. We had the night game, a thrilling, terrifying activity where the kids had to complete various tasks while we, the leaders, dressed as monsters, lurked in the shadows, ready to jump out and deliver a good scare. This new camp location was no exception. We planned to continue the tradition. As the sun began to set and darkness crept in, thick and velvety, we donned our monstrous disguises and hid ourselves in the woods, lying in wait for the kids to approach their designated checkpoints. I remember a part of me felt a strong sense of unease, a premonition that this was a bad idea. As I mentioned, we really hadn't surveyed this new area too thoroughly. This made me question if the night game and our usual antics were such a good idea. The last thing we needed was for one of the kids to fall off some previously unknown cliff face or stumble into a mountain lion, asked Dan while searching for a clue. The area we were using was a big plateau on the south side of the facility. It had only recently been made available to us after a large logging session had cleared a usable path into the area. Still, despite my internal reservations, we decided to continue with our normal activities. We had our radio for communication, a first aid kit, and some basic levels of protection like machetes and a flare gun. I had my belt knife, and I wore it everywhere, even to the bathroom, for comfort. Unfortunately, there were no real firearms among the leaders, so no real security if anything truly went wrong. Our standing orders were clear. The adults had to protect the kids at any cost. In the midst of the game, I found myself in an open stretch of the forest, a place with sparse foliage, almost perfect for a chase. The few scattered trees were the only hiding spots. Using a flashlight was out of the question. Its beam would clearly give away my position. The darkness was unsettling, the kind that plays tricks with your senses, making you think you see things that aren't actually there. As I stood there, a shadow flitted past me, several times over. It was roughly my size, maybe a little taller, but I couldn't make out any other details. I dismissed it as an animal, a deer or a coyote, but I just couldn't shake that strange feeling, you know? Across the clearing, I could see the troop of kids, a small cluster of indistinct shapes, getting ready to make their way over to me. My plan was simple. I'd leap out at the first kid who passed my hiding spot, chase the rest of them backward, and hopefully cut off the kid in the lead, really giving them a good scare. Looking back, I admit I got a little too much joy out of the night games and those spooky activities, mostly because it was a free pass to truly make these kids afraid for a moment. Call me mean, whatever you like, but it was a good time. As they started to come across the field, though, something unseen spooked them, and they went darting back the way they came, a sudden rush of retreating forms. I was left dumbfounded, wondering what could have caused them to turn around so abruptly. As I got ready to move out from my hiding place, that same shadow from earlier passed by once more. But this time, I got a better fix on it. I saw where it was moving in and out from the edge of the tree line. It looked like branches swaying back and forth, almost with a strange rhythm. I kept watching it as I waited for more kids to approach. The same shadows continued to dart in and out of my peripheral vision, but I paid it no mind, trying to shake off that uneasy feeling. I attributed it to the adrenaline of the game and the eerie darkness around me. But then I saw it again, and this time, it was not a fleeting shadow. It was a clear figure, a person, standing near a large tree, not too far away from me. My heart began to pound in my chest, a rapid drumbeat, as I squinted through the oppressive darkness, trying desperately to make out more details. It had to be a person because the form was around my size, roughly the same height, a similar build. It was unmistakable. I thought about calling out for help, for the other leaders, but then I realized it was probably just another camp ranger trying to get into position, and I didn't want to blow our collective cover. Instead, I waited until it looked like the figure was facing my general direction. Then, I cautiously put my arm up and waved. There was no response. I took a few steps closer, peering through the gloom, and tried waving again. Nothing. Then I got a clearer view. The figure was dressed incredibly oddly. Their body was draped in what looked like a torn, dirty burlap sack. Their head was completely covered with several white plastic bags, tied together in a makeshift, grotesque mask. Their hands appeared to be bound together, and they were on their knees. Their head was striking rhythmically against the tree trunk, a dull, wet impact that echoed throughout the silent forest. It was a chilling, unnatural sound in the heart of the wilderness. How had I not heard that before? This definitely looked like some crazy prank the camp leaders might pull, something to really push the boundaries, but a gut feeling told me I was wrong. I knew I didn't know this person. I watched him strike his head against the tree a few more times before I decided I had to intervene. A shiver ran down my spine. Even if it was one of the leaders pulling a prank, something felt profoundly off. The figure was too still, too silent, apart from that rhythmic striking of their head against the tree. I called out, my voice echoing among the trees again. Still no response. Only that disturbing impact continued. I began to approach, my flashlight, which I had decided to risk, aimed directly at the figure. As I got closer, I could clearly see the mud caked on their bare feet, the strange contortion of their bound hands. I called out once more, this time telling them to stop their antics. The striking suddenly ceased. The figure slowly, deliberately, rose to their feet, turning to face me. And I froze. My blood turned to ice in my veins. The figure started walking toward me, their movement slow and deliberate. Pure, primal fear gripped me, screaming at me to run. I turned on my heel and sprinted back towards the main camp, the figure's strange, dragging footsteps seemingly echoing behind me. I didn't dare look back, my mind filled with terrifying images of the strange, silent figure in the woods, those plastic bags on their face. The whole thing just utterly beyond creepy. As I continued to sprint, though, I could tell that they were no longer following me. After bursting out onto the main trail and encountering a couple of other campers, I risked a look behind me. There was nobody. Nothing. No sign of that person I had just seen. This was a massive relief, but in a strange, twisted way, it scared me even more. The fact that I didn't know where he was meant, he could be anywhere, lurking in the vastness of the woods, and that did not sit well with me at all. This was a true nightmare for the job I had, and I wasn't handling it well. I practically assured the kids back at camp, running them through the woods at a dead sprint. I burst into camp, gasping for breath, my lungs burning. The other leaders were there, huddled around the fire, their faces lit by the flickering flames. I looked around wildly, counting heads, ensuring everyone was accounted for. They were. I told them about that figure and the strange, terrifying encounter I had just had. They all laughed it off, thinking I was trying to scare them, thinking I was still playing the game. But I knew what I had seen. Then I asked the kids I had been leading if they'd seen anything, if they had seen the strange person who had spooked them earlier. Of course, they hadn't been with me during the direct run-in, and they said no, further reinforcing the idea that I was simply lying to them, playing a trick. I let it go. I was literally out of options. I just did my best to keep a vigilant eye on camp for the rest of the night. Thank God, nothing weird happened. The next day, I returned to the exact spot with another leader, hoping to find some evidence, some explanation. The tree stood there, silent and imposing. There was something else, though. A small skinned rabbit was nailed to the tree trunk, its lifeless eyes staring right at us. My stomach churned. We called the local police, but they brushed it off as some kind of prank. They said college kids regularly went mushroom hunting up along the side of the mountain and were known to go on psychedelic binges for days at a time. They got calls for half-naked people running around the woods every summer, especially in the area we were in. The camp leaders also offered a good explanation. There were other camps, obviously older age groups of children, at our own facility. It was very possible that someone from one of those groups had come out specifically to mess with the 8 to 10-year-olds. The other camp, which was for troubled youth, was only a couple of miles down the road, so I guess it really wasn't out of the question. I know what I saw that night, though, and I know that somewhere out there, in that vast, unexplored wilderness, something or someone is lurking in the shadows. And just maybe, it's waiting for the next game night to come out and visit, plastic bags and all. I spent years working as a ranger in the Canyonlands Desert Park, a vast and unforgiving landscape. I've grown accustomed to the harsh conditions and the eerie silence that comes with patrolling this wild, beautiful place. The park itself is a remote gem, offering breathtaking views that few other places can match, with towering rock formations and endless vistas. But it's certainly not for the faint of heart. Temperatures soar during the long summer months, often reaching extremes that make simple existence a challenge. The isolation can be overwhelming, a profound quiet that presses in on you. That's why, during the peak summer and off-season, we only allow day visitors. It's simply too dangerous for anyone to venture into the deeper parts alone, especially when the mercury rises to dangerous levels. As a non-peace officer for the Ranger District, my days are usually filled with routine tasks. I maintain trails, monitor the local wildlife, and assist the occasional lost or unprepared hiker. But this particular summer, a few years ago, was very different. The heat was oppressive, even for a seasoned ranger like myself. It beat down relentlessly, baking the earth and making every step feel like a monumental chore. My colleagues and I were restless, searching for anything to break the monotony of the scorching days. And that's when we started receiving the reports. Multiple cars had been spotted entering and exiting the south side of the park, an area less frequented by regular tourists. Even stranger, some visitors claimed to be seeing masked individuals running along the remote dirt roads. At first, we thought it was just some college kids filming a strange project for a class, or maybe a group of thrill seekers looking for some kind of extreme rush in the desert heat. But as those sightings continued, becoming more frequent and detailed, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was genuinely off. Our supervisor, a grizzled old ranger named Alan, a man whose face was as weathered as the canyons themselves, called a meeting to discuss the situation. We gathered around the large map table in the main office, sipping at lukewarm coffee and swapping theories. Some believed it might be a group of poachers, trying to take advantage of the park's vastness and remote corners. Others thought it was just a prank that had gotten completely out of hand. But Alan had a hunch that it was something more sinister, something truly unsettling. He proposed that we break into patrols, conduct a full survey of the park, and cover every trail and road to get to the bottom of this mystery. There were quite a few of us in the district during that off-season, so we had the manpower to conduct a thorough, top-to-bottom investigation of the park, from one side to the other. We couldn't check every tiny back road or hidden crevice, but we could systematically cover all the main drags, the intersections, the parking lots, and the campgrounds, the places that would be able to house a lot of traffic cars and people. I was paired with my colleague, Rachel, a no-nonsense ranger with a keen eye for detail and a steady hand. We set out in our park truck, armed with plenty of water, some energy bars, and a healthy dose of skepticism about what we might actually find. The sun beat down on us mercilessly as we drove, the radio crackling with static as we ventured deeper into the park's vast emptiness. Rachel and I had our own theories. I was convinced it was some kind of poaching scenario. The masked figures that were reported were just an image I had in my head. Guys in pickup trucks, tailgates down, ready to load up their illegal kills, faces covered just in case we came upon them. There's a lot of game in these little valleys along the park. Desert bighorn sheep, antelope, various kinds of deer. Rachel, on the other hand, thought it was perhaps gang activity, or some other nefarious situation that needed to be put a stop to. Neither of us had any real evidence to support our ideas, but it was all we talked about during the drive, filling the quiet hours. As we patrolled, the silence was eerie, almost unnatural. No birds seemed to be chirping, no insects buzzing. Just the low hum of our engine and the soft crunch of gravel beneath our tires. We saw no other signs of life, no indication of what we were searching for. Just the endless expanse of the desert stretching out like an oven-baked canvas. We stopped at each trailhead, scanning the horizon for any sign of activity. Rachel checked the detailed park maps, keeping an eye out for anything that might attract the kind of unsavory characters we were looking for. I searched for any sign of recent human activity. Footprints, tire tracks, discarded items, anything that might give us a lead. Between the map and the vast landscape, we were coming up dry. That being said, there were nearly 20 teams spread out, looking over the lowlands. We were only searching one small part. Just because we didn't find anything didn't mean the same for the others. The hours ticked by, the sun climbing higher in the sky, turning the air into a shimmering haze. We still found nothing. No signs of life, no signs of trouble, just the desert, waiting patiently for us to uncover whatever was going on out here. After a long while, Rachel and I simply ran out of things to do in our assigned sector. We were looping through the same trailheads, checking the same dusty back roads. There wasn't a sign of anything out there. We were starting to get hungry and low on fuel. We decided if we buzzed back to base, refueled ourselves and the truck, then maybe we could get orders for a different area. As we drove back towards the main station, the radio suddenly crackled alive. Alan's voice came through, his tone unusually serious, lacking his usual calm demeanor. "All patrols be advised," he said. "We've received another report of a masked individual, this time near the old abandoned mine shaft. Proceed with caution." Rachel and I exchanged a look. This was getting serious. We quickly hit the gas, our truck now speeding towards the mine shaft, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Alan had sounded dreadful over the radio, so we really didn't know what to expect or what to think. As we arrived at the mine shaft, the other rangers were already scouring the area, their trucks parked haphazardly around the entrance, kicking up dust. We joined the search, our eyes scanning the dusty terrain for any sign of these masked individuals. There was nothing. No sign of them, no sign of any recent human activity. Just the remnants of past legitimate visitors, cigarette butts, spent shell casings from target practice, and all kinds of various litter. Still, it felt creepy. The mine itself was this old derelict opening. A dark maw dropped right into the top of the hillside. There was a crumbling wooden frame and a portion of a ladder that fed straight into absolute darkness. But beyond that, it was mostly collapsed. There might be small offshoots or pockets a person could hide in, but there was no way we were going down there to look for anybody who didn't desperately need help. Rachel and I exchanged a look. Our initial excitement about the new lead quickly dwindled. Now, it seemed our earlier theory about college kids doing some artistic project or a strange prank seemed more likely. Whatever the kids do, we were about to pack up and head back to the station when Alan's voice cut through the air. "Hold up, folks," he called out. "Let's leave a pair of rangers behind to keep an eye on the place. Just for a few hours. Just in case." 2 rangers immediately volunteered to stay behind. The rest of us loaded back into our trucks, ready to head back to the main base. As we came around a sharp bend in the winding dirt road, a voice crackled urgently over the radio. "We've got a vehicle parked behind some rocks at the Dogwood campground. Looks suspicious." We were coming down from the steep, rocky slope where the mine was located. And we had a great vantage point of the area on the south side of the park, including a couple of the outlying campgrounds. One of the rangers in the rear of our convoy, looking down from the cliff edge, had just happened to spot a vehicle cleverly hidden at one of these campgrounds. Our convoy quickly reoriented, turning our trucks around. We began the long, slow descent down the hillside towards that distant campsite. This area was notorious for attracting undesirable individuals, what we informally called riff-raff, and troublemakers who thought they could escape the law by venturing into the park's furthest reaches. The Dogwood campground was, in fact, a known hotspot for illegal activity. We approached it with extreme caution. It's why we had unofficially dubbed it the Dog Campground. There was always some strange dog activity going on out there. It was usually harmless, minor stuff, but still, you could never be too sure. There were stories of tweakers and all manner of other individuals squatting on those fringes of the park. As we entered the campsite, our eyes scanned the area, taking in the scattered trash and abandoned deer. The car was parked behind a cluster of large rocks, partially hidden from view. We spread out, our boots crunching softly on the gravel as we began to investigate. The first thing we noticed was that the car was inoperable. It was a white and black sedan, completely burned out, so badly scorched that nothing recognizable remained of its interior. None of us wanted to approach it. Obviously, something seriously illegal had taken place here. Alan immediately called in the local sheriff's department, requesting deputies on the scene right away. Then, he sent a pair of us back to the district building so they could lead the lawmen back to the scene of whatever crime we had just discovered. The air was heavy with an ominous silence, broken only by the faint creaking of trees in the dry wind and the distant hum of a fly buzzing around our heads. Rachel and I walked the perimeter, our eyes scanning the ground for any further signs of activity. The sun continued to beat down on us, casting long, stark shadows across the dusty terrain. Again, nobody wanted to approach that burned car, so we just poked around, looking for any other clues nearby. We found more spent shell casings, and then a large chopping log that had some deep cuts in it, as well as some dark, dried staining. We really didn't know what to make of any of it. Every step felt like a slow-motion nightmare, as if we were being watched by unseen eyes. The skeletal trees loomed over us, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. I just couldn't shake that feeling that we were walking into some kind of trap, that something or someone was waiting for us, just out of sight. As we cautiously approached the car once more, I noticed it was old, rusted, and covered with a thick layer of dust. The windows were completely blown out, leaving long, jagged shards like teeth in the frames. I tried the door handle, but it was melted in place, fused to the car's frame. Rachel and I exchanged another worried look, our instincts screaming at us that something was profoundly off. We began to circle the car, searching for any signs of forced entry or hurried exit. And that's when I saw it, what looked like a human head resting in the front seat. I froze in place, utterly still, and then let out a low, guttural call for everyone to freeze. Everyone did, their movements halting. Alan slowly crept up to my side, his gaze following mine. My heart began to race as I called out to the others, my voice tight with dread. "We got something here," I managed to say. "What is it, man?" "Quiet," Alan instructed me, his voice a low growl. I pointed down to what I was looking at. Alan peered over my shoulder, then sucked in a sharp breath and took a few steps back. He could see a little more than I could. Just one more step was all it took for me to see the corpse for what it truly was. It wasn't just burned to a crisp. It was methodically dissected, like a frog on a 6th grade science lab table. It was hard to tell what was what, but it looked unmistakably like someone had chopped the guy apart. We all retreated from the car, trying desperately to calm ourselves down. But at this point, we were desperate for the sheriff to arrive. They were at least an hour out, perhaps more. I wish I could say that we got the answers and the relief that we desired when the law finally arrived. They taped off the area and started taking photos, their faces grim. But when we explained the full situation about the body being dismembered, and when they saw it for themselves, their entire demeanor seemed to change. They dismissed us, saying they would reach out if they had any further questions. When we came back to check on the scene the next day, that vehicle was gone, as well as all the trash and any other evidence from the area. We received the official report a few weeks later. All of us were stunned. The conclusion was suicide. The report stated the man had been seat belted into the vehicle and then set it on fire. But before that, someone, according to the report, had laid him out and removed his arms and legs with a wood chopping axe, probably the chopping log that we saw with those dark stains on top. So, how did he cut his own limbs off, climb into the car, put a seatbelt on, and then light it on fire? Alan, the district lead, said there was a lot of illegal drug trafficking in the area. It had to be related, he reasoned. No other scenario made sense. It also made sense why the sheriffs weren't too keen to investigate. There wasn't going to be any leads or breakthroughs in a case like this. This was a make-or-break experience for our department that year. A lot of people moved on to different parks, different occupations altogether. Murder at the edge of the world wasn't in the job description, and a lot of us felt like we were moments away from walking into our own deaths that day. Not me, though. I stuck with the district and still work in that unforgiving desert to this day. I have a lot of cool, weird stories from my time here, but this is definitely the darkest thing to ever happen on the job. The radio crackled just after noon. I was out near Whisper Lake, trying to patch up the northern fence line. My fingers were stiff with cold, and the wind seemed to whisper lonely thoughts as it rushed past me high up on the mountain. I just hammered the last post into the frozen ground when Natalie's voice cut through the static on my belt radio. She sounded calm, but there was always an edge to her words. "Calloway, you copy?" "Copy," I replied. "You're the closest unit to Sector 32. We have a report of an unauthorized fire ring in a ravine northwest of Shadow Peak. Some hikers reported it yesterday. Probably just a few young people hunting illegally, but dispatch tried to contact the permit holders. 3 hunters from Fairview. No answer. I need you to check it out before nightfall." I didn't ask why they were sending just one ranger into a place like the Silent Ravine. I already knew. I'd been working here for 7 years, long enough to be the one they called for the jobs nobody else wanted. I was the lone wolf, the Widowmaker slot. Just me, my badge, and a handgun I almost never used. They gave me the calls that were more about checking things out and reporting back than about needing immediate backup. Most of the time, that was fine by me. But when Natalie said Sector 32, my gut tightened a little. That wasn't the name on any official map. Officially, it was just a stretch of low, rugged backcountry, without trails and with almost no human traffic. The only visitors were usually elk bedding down there in the colder months. But if you talked to the old-timers down in the town of Centennial, or the quiet, weathered local who sometimes sold me dried meat, they called it something else entirely. The Silent Ravine. It was a silly name, full of old legends and myths I didn't believe in. Still, that familiar knot of unease formed in my chest as I pulled my truck off the gravel road and started loading my pack. I put in the usual items: a first aid kit, my GPS device, the handgun, a flare gun, and my emergency satellite phone. I knew from past experience that the satellite signal in that part of the forest was pretty useless, like trying to light a wet match. It was a 3-mile hike in, over crusted snow and dark, jagged rocks. The terrain was steep enough that it felt like the mountain itself was pushing me back down with every step I took. The trees out there were different. They seemed bigger, much older, as if they had somehow escaped the large wildfires and the tree-thinning projects that had shaped other parts of the forest. Their pine trunks were blackened with age, and the moss grew so thick on the ground that it muffled my footsteps. When I finally reached the ravine, the temperature dropped sharply, as if a thick curtain had been pulled across the landscape. The campsite was about 10 yards from a frozen creek bed. There were no tents set up, just 3 cots lying exposed under a half-collapsed tarp. One of the camp chairs was overturned. I found a coffee pot on a cold burner, still half full and, strangely, still warm. There was food on a metal plate, half eaten. It smelled like elk steak, and it wasn't even cold, which meant someone had been here very recently. But the place had a wrong kind of quiet about it. There were no birds, not even the small sound of melting snow dropping from the tree limbs. What really unsettled me were the rifles. All 3 were leaning against a large boulder near the fire pit. Their wooden stocks were dry, and the safety mechanisms were all off. There were no spent shell casings lying nearby. A full box of ammunition sat unopened on a log. No experienced hunter would ever leave their guns like that. Not unless they had left in a desperate hurry. I crouched down, trying to make sense of the tracks in the snow. At first glance, it looked like a mess of boot prints scuffed into the snow and pine needles. But as I followed the trail further out, I realized what I was actually seeing: their footprints. They were wide, with toes spread out, dug into the frozen ground deep enough to cut the skin. I followed them with my eyes as they vanished into the dense woods, heading towards a ridge that dropped sharply into the deeper parts of the ravine. They hadn't been walking. They had been running. I thumbed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Calloway. I found the camp. No sign of the hunters. All their gear is here," but I hesitated. "Something feels wrong. Please advise." Only static answered me. No crackle, no carrier signal. I waited, then tried again. Still nothing. Sunlight was starting to fade behind the ridge now. That late afternoon gray that told me I had about an hour of usable light left. I made the decision to stay put, mark the location, spend the night, and hike out in the morning to get a better signal. If the hunters came back, I would be there. If not, I could guide a search team back in tomorrow. I set up my tent in a small, tight clearing, about 30 yards from the hunters' campsite. I didn't like being that close to their abandoned gear, but I also didn't like leaving it unwatched. I rigged up a simple perimeter using clacker wire and old soda cans. A redneck motion sensor, as we called it, but it had worked more than once to alert me to wildlife or trespassers. Night fell quickly. I didn't build a fire, not out of caution, but because I just didn't feel like warming myself while those empty boots sat by a cold campfire across from me, like silent ghosts waiting for me to tell them what had gone wrong. Around midnight, I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, A low, pushing sound through the trees, slow and rolling. But then I noticed a rhythm to it. Inhale, hold, exhale. It sounded too wet, too close to be just the wind. I didn't move. Then the sound shifted, off to the left of my tent, maybe 20 feet away. The same sound, the same slow, drawn-out breath, like something was pacing. It sounded heavy, yet careful. Something that knew how to move quietly, even if it weighed a lot. Pine needles rustled, but barely. I held my breath, gripping the flare gun under my sleeping bag. I didn't call out. I didn't want to break whatever thin barrier of distance still existed between us. It circled slowly, like the hand of a clock. Then it stopped right by my tent door. I could feel its presence, like a pressure in my ears. There was no smell, no heat, just a heavy, still presence. That's when the scream came. It wasn't close yet. It came from somewhere deeper in the ravine, echoing off the rock faces. But I will never forget the sound. It wasn't like a man yelling. It wasn't like someone in simple pain. It was studied, drawn out, broken up in places, as if whatever was making the sound had heard screaming before, but didn't quite understand where it started or ended. My chest went cold. Another scream followed, closer this time, then silence. I don't remember falling asleep, just that at some point I stopped shaking long enough to close my eyes. When I woke again just before dawn, the tent was still, but outside, in the pale gray light, I saw them. Gouges in the bark of the trees. 3 of them, clawed deep, about 12 feet up. And in the snow, a new trail of barefoot prints circling my tent. When the sun finally broke over the ridge, it didn't bring any warmth with it. The light just made everything look worse. I sat hunched outside my tent, staring at those claw marks carved into the pine like something was trying to dig its way to the sky. 12 feet up, maybe even more. I don't scare easily. I've been mock charged by black bears, pulled dead bodies from snowmelt creeks, and even got lost once in Yellowstone for a full 12 hours with nothing but a broken compass and a dying radio. But this was different. It wasn't panic. It wasn't even fear. Not really. It was the kind of cold dread that settles deep in your gut and sits there, heavy as lead, whispering, "You're already too far gone." I packed quickly. My tent was down, gear strapped, flare gun back on my hip. The snow had crusted overnight, and the prints around my tent had hardened into almost perfect casts. 5 toes, a wide ball of the foot, a deep heel. Human, barefoot. But they were my prints, and they hadn't been there the day before. I followed them, going against every instinct I had. Not because I wanted to, but because something deep inside me told me I needed to see where they went. Something in my bones said it mattered. They led away from the clearing in a jagged, looping pattern as if whatever left them couldn't quite decide where it was going. The tracks twisted around trees, doubled back, then suddenly broke into a straight line toward the deeper part of the ravine. I followed them for about half a mile until they simply stopped. They didn't fade. They weren't covered up by snow or debris. They just ended, like the thing had lifted itself clean off the ground. That's when I smelled it. Rot. Not the sharp, sweet kind that comes with a fresh kill, but the deep, earthy stench of something long dead. It came in waves, almost like a wave of heat. I took a few cautious steps forward, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The forest was still frozen in that unnatural quiet. No birds, no squirrels, not even the small sound of branches creaking in the cold. Then I saw it. A rib cage. Not human, probably elk. But it was wrong. It had been hoisted into a tree about 20 feet off the ground, jammed between 2 limbs like a grotesque offering. The spine had been split cleanly down the middle and peeled open, the ribs bent outward like skeletal wings. Snow had dusted over the exposed bone, but the meat was still red. Steam curled up from where it hung. I stood there for a long time, watching my breath fog the air, trying to piece together the timeline. The hunters had been here maybe 2 days ago. I had spent the night in their camp. Now I was looking at a fresh kill, displayed like this. That was when I heard a branch crack behind me. I turned slowly, one hand dropping to the grip of my flare gun, the other brushing against the butt of my sidearm. I didn't pull either weapon yet. I waited. The trees gave me nothing at first. Then something shifted far back, maybe 30 yards away. At first, I thought it was a bear, a large shape, hunched over, half hidden behind a stand of spruce trees. But then it stepped out, and I saw its arms. They were too long, bent at a wrong angle at the elbows. Its skin was the color of ash, pulled tightly over visible bones. It was a man, or had been once. He was naked, his feet dark with dried blood from the cold, his chest rising and falling in quick bursts, like a dog that had run too far. His mouth hung open, and in it, clenched between his teeth, was a strip of flesh, dark, stringy, still dripping. He didn't look at me at first, just kept dragging his feet through the snow, slow and twitchy, like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by someone drunk. His shoulders jerked now and then, sharp and sudden, as if he was trying to shrug off something that clung to him from the inside. Then he stopped, his head turned, and his eyes locked with mine. They were gray, with no whites, no pupils, just flat, dull, like river stones. That's when he spoke. "Brian," he said, my name, in my own voice. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I don't even know if my heart kept beating. "Brian, help me." The voice was perfect. The same rhythm, the same tone, the same hoarse quality I get in the winter after too many days in the cold. It was me, and it wasn't. Then it smiled, or tried to. The lips didn't move correctly. The corners split, revealing more teeth than should have been in that mouth. I saw blood, fresh and frozen, crusted along the gums. The thing tilted its head, like a dog hearing a new sound. Then it whispered, almost like it was asking a favor. "You left me here." And then it started walking faster, its arms swinging wide, its joints bending all wrong. That's when I broke. I turned and ran, crashing through the snow, barely able to see through the trees, my breath burning in my lungs. Behind me, I heard something laugh. Not loud, not like it thought something was funny, just amused, like it knew I wouldn't get far. I hit the slope before I realized I'd veered off the trail. My foot caught a root hidden under the snow, and I went down hard. The snap in my ankle felt like a firecracker going off in my leg. Pain bloomed instantly, bright, hot, and overwhelming. I rolled onto my back, gasping, trying to drag myself up the incline. My pack snagged on a branch, and I screamed, not from the pain, but because I heard it again. My voice, right behind me. "Brian, that night, I built a fire out of desperation more than skill. I was shaking too hard to focus, but I knew if I didn't keep it going, I'd be dead by morning. My ankle was swelling quickly, and every movement sent a bolt of lightning through my leg. The woods stayed quiet for a while, then they came. First one, then two more. All of them moving in that same jerky, loose way, like puppets that had forgotten how people walk. They stayed just outside the firelight. I couldn't make out details, only shapes, outlines, but I heard them whispering. Sometimes in the voice of the hunter I'd seen, sometimes in my own, and sometimes in a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. Sophie, my ex-wife. She was dead, had been since the car crash, but the voice that floated out from the dark was hers, gentle, broken, calling for me. "Brian, come home." I bit down on my fist until I tasted blood. They circled all night. I didn't sleep, just sat there, the fire dwindling, clutching the flare gun like it was my last hope, and maybe it was. I don't remember how many days passed after the fire finally burned out. Time bent out there, folding over itself like the twisted trees, heavy with silence. My watch had stopped sometime after the second night frozen, and I had stopped checking it. When you are lying in the snow with a broken ankle, no food, and shadows circling just outside your reach, minutes start to feel like hours. And the hours, they just stop meaning anything at all. I tried to ration what little I had left, but it was useless. My hands were too cold to tear open food wrappers, and by the third night, my stomach didn't care anymore. I had vomited bitter bile into the snow, and wept when I tasted blood on my tongue, thinking for one terrible moment that maybe it had come from something else, something I didn't remember eating. That idea clawed at me more than the cold. I started seeing things more than just the figures in the dark, more than the familiar voices calling out from the tree line. I saw my mother sitting cross-legged in the snow, humming a lullaby she used to sing when I was a boy. Her lips were blue with cold, but her voice was warm. She kept pointing at something just behind me, smiling. "Not much time left, Bree," she said. I turned once, just once, but there was nothing there, only more snow, more trees. The smell of rot was thicker now, clinging to me, sinking into my beard and the fibers of my jacket. By the time the rescue crew found me, I didn't have the strength to cry. I heard them before I saw them. Two men calling my name from somewhere above. Real voices. Human. I didn't believe it at first. I was sure it was another trick, another game played by whatever was left of the hunters, or whatever had taken their skin. So, I stayed quiet, hiding behind a half-buried log, clutching the flare gun like it was a sacred object, my finger frozen to the trigger. I didn't move until one of them got close enough for me to see the badge on his jacket. A real badge, a real face. He looked scared when he saw me. Not cautious, but truly scared. He dropped to his knees, called for the other one, and then I passed out. They said I was lucky, hypothermic, frostbitten, but alive. They airlifted me to Laramie General Hospital. I woke up 3 days later with an 4 in my arm and the raw skin of my lips crusted with dried blood. My right foot had turned black in places. I couldn't feel 2 of my toes, and I couldn't stop shaking. They questioned me, of course. First, it was the local sheriff, then 2 agents from Fish and Wildlife, then someone in a gray suit who never gave me a name. They wanted details, timelines, coordinates, who I saw, and what I thought had happened. I tried to answer. I really did. But every time I opened my mouth, I'd hear it again. My own voice echoing from the woods. "Brian, come home." Eventually, I just said what I could. It mimicked their voices. It made them eat. That was all I managed before the nurse gave me something to help me sleep. They didn't believe me, of course. Not really. They ran blood tests, brain scans, psychiatric evaluations. They said I was suffering from isolation psychosis combined with post-traumatic stress. They said I probably hallucinated the voices and imagined the bodies. That I had broken my ankle in a fall and crawled into some fugue state brought on by exposure and starvation. But they couldn't explain the claw marks on the trees. They couldn't explain the fingerprints found around my tent, my own, overlapping a dozen others in directions that made no sense. They couldn't explain how I had survived 4 nights with no food, no water, and internal injuries that should have killed me if not for what the surgeon called an almost superhuman pain tolerance. And they certainly couldn't explain what the search team found when they went back into the silent ravine. 3 corpses, or parts of them, anyway. One was impaled 25 feet up in a lodgepole pine, still bleeding when they cut him down. The others were arranged around the fire pit in the original camp, their arms folded neatly across their chests, their faces peeled back. One was missing his jaw entirely, and none of them had eyes. The bones weren't picked clean. They were gnawed. They found the site I described, the elk rib cage in the tree. They took photos, bagged the remains, and burned the carcass on site. Then came the cave. I hadn't seen it myself, but the team stumbled across it half a mile from the main site. It had a shallow entrance, lined with claw marks, and bones littered the floor inside. Deer, elk, something canine, and human. One of the team members said it looked like a butcher's den. Another swore he saw something still wet hanging from the ceiling before they sealed it off. And on the far wall, scrolled in what they guessed was blood and soot, were 4 words gouged deep into the stone. Hunger doesn't die. After that, they shut the whole area down. No official statement, no public warning. Just a line drawn across a map and a whispered order passed through the ranger stations. No patrols past Shadow Peak. Not without a team. Not without special authorization. They gave me early retirement, a medical discharge, citing psychological grounds. I didn't fight it. I left Wyoming 3 weeks later, moved north, and bought a cabin in Montana with what was left of my pension. I haven't set foot in a forest since. I tried once. I went for a walk near Glacier National Park in the spring. Got maybe half a mile in before I heard something move behind the trees. Too slow, too deliberate. I turned around and haven't been back since. I still keep the flare gun though. It sits by my bed, loaded, cleaned every month. Just a habit, I guess. Sometimes when the snow falls hard and the wind hits just right, I swear I hear it again. That breath. That broken, stitched-together scream. And once, just once, I heard her voice. Sophie, whispering my name from the tree line, soft and mournful. I didn't answer. I won't. Because I know now that's how it starts. If I had to pinpoint where things started to unravel, I'd say it was the second night I spent up there. But that wouldn't be the full truth. The unraveling started long before. Maybe when I volunteered for this job, or maybe when I first saw the tower and convinced myself it looked quaint instead of what it really was. My name is Dana Cruz, and I used to be a fire lookout for the Forest Service. Last winter, I took a solo off-season post up in the Serpent Peaks. They called it a low-risk visual position. It was supposed to be easy. Just me, a tower, and 30 days of snow-covered silence. They called it Lookout 47, but I couldn't find it on any official database. When I asked around, the senior ranger gave me a strange smirk and said, "That one's been there forever. Old Cold War communication site or something. Don't worry about it." That should have been a warning sign. The helicopter dropped me off in mid-January. There was no trail in, no road, just a clearing about 100 yards from the tower where the rotors kicked up snow and made the trees shake. They didn't even turn off the engine. One crew member tossed my gear onto the ground while the other shouted over the noise, "See you in a month. Keep the radio on." Then they lifted off and I was alone. The tower looked older than it had in the photo. It rose out of the snow like a skeleton, narrow and too tall. The wood was blackened, and it stood 3 stories high with steel support beams that looked like they had been cut from old railway tracks. There was frost along the windows, and the whole structure groaned when the wind moved through it. Inside, it was basic. A single bed, a propane stove, a hand pump sink, an old file cabinet, and a shortwave radio bolted to the wall. On the first floor, there was a composting toilet and a trap door. A thick steel latch held it shut, painted over probably 20 times. A red sticker on it read, "Do not open. Maintenance access only." The heat came from a cast iron wood stove that had clearly been patched over with steel welds. The chimney rattled every time the wind picked up. The whole thing felt crooked, like the earth had tried to shake it off at some point, but had given up halfway. The first few days were normal. Snow fell in long, quiet drifts. I set up my daily check-ins, took wind and humidity readings, and logged them by hand. I watched for smoke columns and kept an eye on lightning strikes on the ridge, though there were very few. And then I started noticing the birds. Dead ones, always crows or magpies, always around the base of the tower. I thought maybe they hit the structure during periods of low visibility. But what stood out was their placement. 4 or 5 dead birds a day, laid out in loose circular patterns, always facing the same direction, toward the western ridge. The trees out there leaned slightly too. At first, I blamed heavy snowfall or strong winds, but then I took a straight edge and held it up against the tree trunks. Every single one on the western line tilted the same way. Not bowed, but tilted, as if they were leaning towards something they couldn't quite reach. On day 4, just after dusk, the radio crackled. I'm not talking about normal static. I've heard faulty signals. This was a clipped, repeating message that faded in like it was pushing through something thick. Fire line breach. Visual confirmation. Coordinates. Static. Request acknowledgement. I responded as I was supposed to. I gave my call sign. Marked my location. Dead air. It played again exactly 47 minutes later. Same words. Same breathless male voice. I triangulated the coordinates. I thought maybe a repeater station was malfunctioning. I pulled out my old topographic map and found a location. It led right back to me. Lookout 47. The next day, I called dispatch. They dismissed it as interference from old relay stations still bouncing signals. They said it happens sometimes, especially in the mountains. I asked about the station number, the one attached to the message. Silence on the other end. Then, that's not a current call sign. Might be Cold War leftovers. Just ignore it. That night, I kept the radio off. I figured if it wanted to talk, it could wait. But around midnight, I woke up to something different. The tower was moving, swaying. I felt windstorms before. This wasn't wind. It felt like something huge had brushed against the tower, like something massive was moving through the forest. Slow, deliberate, and heavy enough to shift the snowpack. I climbed the ladder to the second floor and stared out the west-facing window. There were no lights, no movement. But for a moment, just before I turned away, I saw something glint in the darkness between the trees, like glass catching moonlight. I watched for another hour, but it didn't happen again. The next morning, I found a new circle of dead birds, this time inside the perimeter fence. The weirdest part was that there were no tracks, no paw prints, no drag marks. Just a perfect circle of feathers and bone slowly melting into the snow. I didn't write anything about it in my logs. I didn't want to be flagged for a psychological evaluation, but I did start sleeping with a hatchet next to my bed, just in case. And the trap door, it started rattling at night. Not banging, not shaking, just rattling, like something underneath was breathing too hard. By the end of the first week, the tower no longer felt like a shelter. I stopped thinking of it as mine. Stopped calling it home base in my log entries. It wasn't a tower anymore. It was a bone sticking up out of the earth. Something left behind by something much larger. I hadn't slept properly in days. Not because of noise, but because of the silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet either. It was hollow, intentional. The kind of quiet that feels like someone holding their breath. It started with my watch. I wear a digital Casio I've had since I was 15. It's tough. I synced it to dispatch time every Monday. On day 8, it told me it was 9:43. I mean, the wall clock said 9:47. I didn't think much of it. Maybe the battery was getting low. But by that night, the watch was ahead, 4 minutes fast. And when I sensed it the next morning, I watched it drift, second by second backward until it matched the wall clock again. The next morning, it was off again. That's when I took out my compass. Same problem. Inside the tower, the needle twitched like a scared dog's tail. Outside, it was fine. Clear as a bell. I walked the perimeter just to be sure. 20 steps west, turn north. The needle flickered in the window's reflection of the tower, then steadied again the moment I was out in the open. Whatever was happening, it didn't want to leave the structure. And neither did I. Not because I felt safe, but because I felt connected. Like leaving too far would snap something inside me. Every night, I found more bird circles now, in pairs like mirrored halos, one larger, one small, always perfect, always facing west. By day 11, I stopped marking them in the log. I just burned them. It was that or bury them. And I kept remembering that note in the journal I found. Burn the birds. Don't bury them. Yes, the journal. I didn't find it in the file cabinet or on a shelf. I found it in the wall. Behind a nailed-up board above the sink, I heard something rustle. I thought it was a mouse. Instead, I pulled out a leather-bound notebook that had been sealed in waxed canvas, completely dry despite the humidity. It was stamped with faded ink, property of W. Wells, 1963. Most of it was torn out or missing. The entries that remained were written in a tight, frantic script. Some words were repeated over and over. Phrases like, watch the shadows between the stairs. Don't sleep inside more than 3 nights. That's how it learns your face. If you look down the trap door too long, it looks back. One page had a sketch, charcoal and jagged. A figure crawling up from a hole. No face, no eyes, just an open, stretching mouth like a black tunnel. Too many fingers. I should have burned the whole thing, but I didn't. I just kept reading. Then came the photo. I hiked the ridge that afternoon. My trail cameras had picked up strange flickers, movement on the edge of the wilderness. I figured it was just elk. The storm had cleared, and the sky was sharp and clear. About 2 miles from the tower, tucked into a windbreak of stone and scrub, I found a half-burned tent-melted nylon, a scorched coffee pot, and near the fire pit, an old camera, a vintage model with a cracked lens, film still inside. I hauled it back, loaded it into the chemical kit I'd stashed in my equipment box, and developed the negatives in a collapsible basin by headlamp. There were 4 exposures. 3 were ruined, just streaks and shadows. But the last one, it was me. Standing at the top window of the tower, taken from outside, somewhere low and far away. It was a perfect match. Same coat, same hair tied in a knot, same glove with the duct-taped knuckle. But there were two things wrong. First, my eyes were closed. Second, I was facing the window. Whoever took the picture was inside the tower, looking out at where the photo was taken. I didn't sleep that night. I barricaded the trap door with an iron tool chest and wedged my snowshoes over it crosswise. I kept the camera pointed at it. I used every single headlamp I had and left them on until the batteries died. But just before dawn, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, it was 3:11 a.m. Every light was off. And the trapdoor, it was open 6 inches. I didn't hear it open. I didn't feel it. The air smelled like ozone and cedar sap. Like the moment before lightning strikes, I got up slowly. The camera was still running. I played the footage. It showed me, rising at 2:47 a.m., silent, barefoot, walking to the trapdoor. I knelt. I whispered something. Then I opened it and stared down. I didn't move for 13 minutes, just stared. When I stood up and walked back to bed, I glanced at the camera and smiled. The real me, the me watching this the next day, never remembered doing any of it. But there it was on tape, frame by frame, smiling like someone who knew they weren't alone anymore. I stopped logging entries after day 17, not because I forgot, but because I didn't trust my own handwriting anymore. There were entries I never wrote, phrases I'd never say, things like, "It wears the skin first, then the voice. You'll feel it watching when your heartbeat echoes back wrong. Don't open the door unless you're outside already." Some entries were written in my style, but with words that felt off, like someone trying to imitate me without understanding what the words meant. Like a bad translation of myself. That's when I knew something wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to replace me. Day 19. The trapdoor was open again when I woke up. Nothing around it was disturbed, but I could feel it. This pressure in the room, like the oxygen was thicker, heavier. I left the tower around noon just to get away. I hiked a 2-mile loop I'd done at least 5 times before. Only this time, when I reached the ridge, the tower wasn't there. I mean, it was, but it wasn't my tower. It was older, with thicker beams, no solar panel. The windows were square instead of rounded. It looked exactly like the black and white photo they gave me, the one from the 1950s. At first, I thought I'd gotten turned around. I pulled out my compass. It spun wildly, then settled on south. I walked in a straight line for 40 minutes. The tower never got closer, so I turned back, using a stream as my guide. When I reached my tower, my actual tower, there were 2 sets of footprints circling it. Identical boots, same depth, but different walking styles. One dragging slightly, the other light and fast. Neither trail led away. Day 21. The voices returned on the radio. Only now they weren't recorded loops. They were live and they sounded like me. Assignment received. File line perimeter established. Tower is secure. I yanked the battery out. It kept transmitting. I smashed the unit with the hatchet. It kept going. That night, I gave in. I opened the trapdoor fully and went down. It wasn't just a utility hatch. It was a staircase, spiraling down in iron, far deeper than the tower structure could possibly allow. The air grew warm the lower I went, like a furnace had been running for years. The walls were stone, but smooth and glistening, etched with one number again and again. 47. Etched so deep they formed grooves in the rock. I don't know how far I descended. It could have been 5 minutes, could have been an hour. Then I reached the bottom. There was a mirror, 7 feet tall, no frame, freestanding, set into the wall like it had grown there. And it didn't reflect me. Not at first. Just static like snow on an old TV screen. Then something stepped into frame. It was me, but wrong. Taller, paler. My face stretched into a grin that didn't end. Eyes black, no pupils. Like someone was wearing a reflection of my body like a costume. It raised its hand and tapped the glass. I ran. The static chased me. Not a sound, but a feeling. Like every step I took was being replayed a second behind me. Like the world was trying to rewind and pull me back. I climbed until my lungs burned. When I burst out of the hatch, it was morning. Snow on the ground, light flooding the tower. But there was another Dana standing at the window. Her back was turned, same build, same coat. I blinked, and she was gone. Day 23, the final day, I counted. I made a decision. I wouldn't sleep. I'd stay awake until they came. Let them take me, fight me, mimic me. I didn't care. At exactly 2:47 a.m., something whispered beneath the floorboards. Not words, just breath, wet and slow. Then it spoke. You've been out, but you never came back. Let us fix that. I turned every camera on, lit every flare I had. The windows fogged over. Ice crept up from the corners. The whole tower groaned like it was sinking. Then the trapdoor slammed open. Something crawled out. I only saw its arms, long gray, jointed like spider legs, but fleshy. Each finger had my fingernails, my scars, my knuckle tattoo. It dragged a second me up behind it, blank-eyed and naked, mouth gaping, chest rising like it had just learned how to breathe. It turned to look at me, and I saw myself flinch. I raised the flare gun, fired once, then everything went white. When they found me, if they really did, I was alone. I was barefoot, sitting on the roof of the tower, whispering coordinates that didn't exist. They airlifted me out. They said I'd been exposed to carbon monoxide from the stove. Said my radio equipment must have malfunctioned. Said my camera footage was corrupted. But I know what I saw. I know I didn't come back alone. Because sometimes when I pass a mirror at night, I catch myself smiling. And I'm not smiling. They told me Whispering Ridge was a quiet post. That was the exact word they used. Quiet. Not remote, not underfunded, not cursed, just quiet. The ranger station was small, barely big enough for one person to sleep, eat, and breathe without going completely stir-crazy. The nearest town was 30 miles down a winding 2-lane road that rarely saw any traffic. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just static, trees, and time. Which, frankly, was what I thought I needed. I took the transfer after a difficult incident at my last park. I won't go into details, but it involved a missing child, a 4-day search, and a recovery that still makes me flinch when I close my eyes. So, when my supervisor offered a slower post, I jumped at it. Now, I think they were just trying to get rid of me. I arrived late on a Tuesday in mid-October. The sun was already dipping behind the tree line by the time I pulled into the dirt turnout where the ranger station sat. The building looked older than the national park system itself. The shingles curled like old fingernails, the windows were fogged, and the door groaned like something didn't want it to be opened. Inside, the air was musty. The fridge didn't hum. The power flickered. The logbooks were sparse, with months missing between entries. Most just said, "All clear." One, written in smudged pencil, simply read, "If you see them, don't stare." I laughed nervously at that, thinking it was a joke. A ranger's version of cabin fever. I'd write something funnier when I left. I never did. My first 2 days were uneventful. Just long hikes through overgrown trails, stepping over fallen branches, with the occasional rustle of a squirrel or a deer bounding through the brush. Honestly, it was nice. The silence helped. But even then, I started to notice things that felt off. The birds didn't sing past dusk. I mean, none. Like someone flipped a switch, and every living thing shut its mouth right after sunset. There weren't even crickets, just wind moving through branches like a giant exhaling. And the woods, God, the woods felt watchful, like the trees weren't just trees, but centuries waiting. I blamed it on nerves. Then came the third night. I was going over trail maps by lantern light when I heard it. Not loud, just soft taps on the window behind me. I froze. The kind of freeze that sinks into your bones, like your body knows something before your mind does. I turned around slowly. There was a silhouette at the edge of the tree line, not close, maybe 40 feet back, just far enough that the darkness swallowed most of it. But it was tall, human-shaped, its shoulders too broad, its head cocked at a weird angle, like it didn't understand how necks worked, and it was facing the cabin, facing me. I blinked. It was gone. I went outside with my flashlight, trying to be brave. Nothing but quiet trees and cold air. No prints, no broken twigs. But when I came back inside, I noticed something on the doorstep. A small wooden figure, roughly carved, humanoid, no face, no eyes, just watching. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I radioed the main ranger office. I told them I thought I had a trespasser. Maybe someone messing around, pulling a prank. The voice on the other end sounded bored. "You're alone up there, Hayes. Ain't nobody hiking that far out this time of year." I asked if the old logs ever mentioned things being left at the cabin. Carvings, strange visitors. The reply crackled through. "What logs?" That day, I hiked out farther, wanting to clear my head. I hoped that maybe I'd find boot prints, something to make it make sense. But around mile 4, I noticed something across the ravine. A figure standing between two trees, motionless, facing me. It wore a ranger's uniform. "Mine?" I called out. "Hey, you all right over there?" Nothing. No movement. I waved, raised my binoculars, but as soon as I focused, it was gone, like it had never been there at all. That night, I locked the doors, shoved furniture against the windows, and kept the flashlight by my side in bed. I didn't sleep much, but when I did, I dreamed of trees whispering my name in reverse. And when I woke up, heart racing, throat dry, I found something new. Another totem, but this one was different. It had a hat like mine, and it was sitting on the pillow beside me. I told myself I'd leave the next day. Walk down to town, call someone, tell them to send a truck, or hell, a damn helicopter. But then I opened the front door and found footprints in the mud coming from the woods, leading right to the cabin, but none leading away. And the forest was still breathing. I stopped logging my patrols. Didn't see the point anymore. Every trail either looped back on itself or disappeared entirely. Just gone, like it had been swallowed whole by the forest overnight. I'd mark a tree with tape, walk 10 minutes, and end up right back at it. Only now the tape was cut and tied into a little noose. I told myself I was just tired, overworked, isolated, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were laughing at me. And I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I mean that one morning I stepped outside, and I heard a low, breathy chuckle from the branches overhead. Nothing visible, nothing moving. Just the sound of something trying to imitate human amusement badly. The totems kept showing up. One day it was on the porch again. The next day, inside the firewood box, then on my pillow. Always there, always closer. But they were different now, more detailed. The first ones had been crude, blocks of wood with sticks for arms. Now they had realistic proportions, bent knees, fingers, clothes carved into the surface. One had my scar, the little one above my eyebrow I got in a bike wreck when I was 12. Another had my watch carved, exactly like the one I wear. Even the face was cracked the same way. That was when I started keeping them, lining them up on the shelf across from my bed. I didn't know why. Maybe I thought if I could watch them, they couldn't watch me. But the collection kept growing, dozens. And one morning, I woke up and saw that they'd been rearranged, all of them facing my bed. The worst was the one I found under my pillow. I'd fallen asleep with the lantern on. Figured maybe the light would help. I woke up around 2 o'clock and, with this pain in my neck, like I'd been sleeping on something hard. I reached under the pillow and pulled it out. A totem with my face, perfect down to the tired eyes and crooked mouth, except the eyes were burned out. Hollow sockets blackened around the edges like it had been held to a flame. I threw it in the stove and watched it burn. And as it blackened and cracked, I heard something outside scream. I found the journal that night under the floorboards, right where the old wood creaked the loudest. Leather-bound, moldy, pages stuck together with moisture and time. It belonged to someone named Ranger Glenn Powers, dated 1982. He wrote about everything. The whispers, the totems, the vanishing trails. He'd been assigned to Whispering Ridge, too. Said it was supposed to be a quiet place for recovery. I read the entries obsessively, flipping pages with shaking hands. One passage burned into my brain. Don't answer if you hear them say your name. Not forward, not backward. That gives them permission. Another. I burned a totem once. The forest didn't like it. I woke up with roots in my mouth. The last entry was just a frantic scroll. The altar calls. The altar sees. The altar remembers. Then just symbols scratched deep into the paper with something sharp. Not letters, but spirals, branches, eyes. My radio started mimicking me. At first, I thought it was just feedback, static, maybe solar interference. But then it played back my exact words before I said them. I'd say, Ranger Hayes, checking perimeter. And 2 seconds before that, the radio would crackle to life with Ranger Hayes checking perimeter in my own voice. Sometimes it would talk at night on its own, whispering, weeping, and once, just once, I swear it played a recording of me dreaming, my own voice gasping. Don't open the door. Don't let it in. I gave up trying to sleep after that. I started patrolling at night just to get out of the cabin, just to feel like I was doing something. But the trails were wrong. I'd walk a straight line and end up in places I'd never seen before. One time, I came across a spiral of feathers and teeth laid out in the mud, perfectly symmetrical. Another night, a hiker stumbled out of the woods toward me, shirtless, filthy, eyes milky white. I called out, "Hey, you okay? You need help?" He opened his mouth and spat up mud. Thick, black, rotten-smelling sludge full of bark and hair. Then he ran on all fours into the trees. I didn't follow. The next night, I woke up to the radio playing music, a warped, scratchy version of some old country song. Something about watching from the ridge. I turned it off. 5 minutes later, it clicked back on and started playing my screams. I hadn't screamed yet, but I did the following night because I finally saw the thing that had been leaving the totems. It was standing by the edge of the woods. Tall, too tall, legs like stilts, arms hanging too long, wearing my uniform. The face was a mask of carved wood, my face burned into it, eyes hollow, mouth open in a smile. And behind it, more of them. Dozens, motionless, lined up like trees that had learned how to stand on their own. I ran back inside, slammed the door, nailed it shut. But in the morning, the nails were gone, stacked neatly by the door, and the totem on the porch had changed again. This one held a tiny wooden lantern, and in its chest was a real human tooth. I think I'm being led somewhere. The forest wants me to go deeper, and I'm starting to want it too. Because when I'm in the woods, the fear goes quiet, and the whispers sound like they're saying my name, just not the way I remember it. I haven't slept in, I don't know. Days, weeks. Time doesn't work right out here anymore. The sun rises too early, sets too late. Sometimes it doesn't rise at all. Just lingers behind the trees, like it's afraid to come through. The totems cover every surface in the cabin now. Some of them move when I'm not looking. One turned its head while I blinked. Another one was crying. I found myself talking to them. Not like a joke, not like a breakdown, but like a ritual. I'd come in from patrol, mud on my boots, blood sometimes too, though I can't remember from what. And I'd kneel in front of the shelf, press my forehead to the floor, and whisper, "I see you, I see you." I don't remember when I started doing that, but I do know what happened when I missed a night. The next morning, I woke up and found a fresh totem nailed to the inside of my door. It was hammered through the wood, splinters everywhere. It had no eyes, no face, just a hollow hole where the mouth should be, filled with dirt and ants. Carved into the door next to it were the words, "You're forgetting who you are." That was when the forest opened a path for me, a new trail. One I swear hadn't existed before. It wasn't on the map. It wasn't even possible. It cut through areas too steep, too dense, too far north. But it was there now, laid out with black stones and hanging bones from tree branches like wind chimes. The air buzzed with electricity, and the birds followed me, silent, their heads tilted, watching. At the center of it all was the altar, exactly as described in Glenn Power's journal. Stone cracked, covered in lichen and bloodstains that hadn't dried, even though the nearest human had vanished months ago. Around it, totems, hundreds of them, some carved fresh, some ancient, weathered by time. Some that looked just like the ones from my shelf, and a few that looked just like me. One had my eyes. One had my exact jacket, stained with the same oil I spilled 2 nights ago. One was whispering, not speaking, just whispering. Its wooden mouth clicked open and shut as it muttered, "Join us! Join us!" I radioed for backup, or I thought I did. I hit the emergency beacon, held the button down. I screamed into the microphone. But all I heard on the other end was my voice. Calm, confident me. I'm fine. No assistance needed. Just lost in the trees for a moment. Except I hadn't said that. I don't remember walking back to the cabin. The next thing I knew, I was standing in front of it, holding a totem. It was bleeding. Not sap, but blood. I dropped it and ran inside, locked the door, tried to write everything down, tried to remember who I was, but the logbook wasn't mine anymore. The pages were filled with entries I hadn't written, and handwriting that wasn't mine. He walks deeper now. The forest knows his name. He's almost one of them. I tried burning everything. The totems, the clothes, the furniture. The fire wouldn't light. No matter how much fuel I poured, it just hissed and laughed. A dry, choking sound coming from the chimney, even though the flue was closed. I think I'm already gone. Sometimes I catch glimpses of myself in the mirror, and the face looking back isn't mine. Sometimes I talk, and the voice isn't mine. The whispers used to be outside. Now they're in my head, and they know every thought I've ever had. This is my last transmission. If you're hearing this, don't come looking. Don't try to find the altar. Don't follow the path lined with bones. Don't trust the voice on the radio if it says it's me, because I don't know if I'm still Elliot Hayes. And I don't think I'm the only one who looks like me anymore. They took my face. They took my voice. They took everything except the part that still screams. When the search team arrived, they found the cabin abandoned. No signs of struggle. The bed was made, food untouched, fire still warm. On the table sat a new totem, fresh blood still damp in the carvings. It was smiling, and it had Elliot's exact face. His uniform was found hanging from a tree branch half a mile away, neatly folded, pressed. One searcher, Beckley, wandered off during the second night. They found him curled in a hollow log, repeating, "They wear us like bark. They grow into our skin." They airlifted him out. He hasn't spoken since. The station has been closed, officially decommissioned. Unofficially, no ranger has taken the Whispering Ridge assignment since. But sometimes late at night, locals say you can hear a voice on the old ranger frequency. Calm, even, asking for coordinates. Asking for backup. Asking if they look okay. It's me, Elliot. I'm still out here. I'm just a little lost. I always thought the rain in Cascade National Park was like an old lullaby, soft and slow, as if the forest was trying to hum itself to sleep. Most nights I'd lie in my bunk at Gargoyle Peak Ranger Station, listening to every cedar shingle soak it in while Mirror Lake breathed just beyond the tree line. But on October 17th, 2015, the storm didn't sing. It muttered, then growled, as if it already knew what was coming up the trail. I had pulled the late shift, signed out of dispatch at 10:30 p.m., and stepped into my cabin feeling numb with exhaustion. My wet uniform went on a hook, damp boots by the stove. A quick swipe of a towel across my hair, then sweatpants, wool socks, and a t-shirt. I turned the lantern just bright enough to scratch out a line or two in the station log. No incidents. Barred owl calls ×3. Lake level normal. The ink was barely dry when something cut through the stillness across the water. A scream, pitched so sharp it felt aimed straight at my spine. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe a cougar's yowl, or drunk campers fooling around, or an echo off the basalt cliffs. Except it happened again, closer. And this time, it wasn't a lone cry, but a flurry of footsteps beating a frantic path to my door. By the time the hinges rattled under desperate fists, adrenaline had completely wiped the sleep from my eyes. I opened the door on its chain and was met with a face full of rain, mud, and panic. Two women, one with dark hair, one blonde, stood there, completely drenched. Their pupils were wide, and they were breathing like they had sprinted a long, terrifying distance. Blood stained the brunette's sleeve so dark it looked black in the lantern light. "Please," the blonde gasped. He bit her." That word, bit, hit harder than the wind driving lake spray across the porch. I unlatched the chain and swung the door open. They stumbled in, water puddling on my floorboards. The injured one, Mara, as she later told me her name was, clutched her upper arm with the kind of grip you use when you re-afraid something inside might spill out. I carefully peeled back her soaked fleece jacket and instantly regretted it. Teeth marks, deep like a dog's, wide like a man's, with the flesh lifted in ridges. Blood pulsed slowly but steadily. While I cinched a pressure bandage around her arm, her friend Katie talked quickly through her tears. They had decided to hike the old Spruce Railroad grade at night for fun. Flashlights in one hand, phone cameras in the other. Inside the tunnel, they heard a scraping sound. A rhythmic click, like rocks tapping glass. Then a shape slipped out of the dark ceiling, hit the ground on all fours, and stood up. Naked, covered in mud. Its eyes shone brightly, like a cat's. It charged into Mara, pinned her to the wall, sank its teeth into her shoulder, and shook her. Kitty emptied a small pepper spray canister into its face. It growled, spat blood, and kept coming until she hurled her flashlight at it, and they both ran. 4 miles of winding trail later, the only light they saw was the faint glow from Gargoyle Peak cabins. "He followed us all the way down," Katie said, her voice breaking. "We heard him behind us until the very last curve." The moment she finished, my radio squawked. Jess's cabin was 20 yards down the slope. She had heard the commotion. I gave her the short version. 2 victims, 1 bite wound. Possible assailant still active. She answered with a clipped, "Copy. I'm already lacing my boots." I locked the door, took my handgun from the gun safe, and chambered around. Mara's blood looked almost black against the gauze. Her teeth chattered, even though the cabin was warm. I shoved spare magazines into my parkour pocket and glanced at the rain-streaked window. No flashlight beams out there, no silhouettes, just 1,000 wet branches bending under the wind. "I'm going after him," I told them. "Jess will stay with you. You're safe here." Safe felt like a fragile promise, but it was all I had. I stepped onto the porch, and the night swallowed me whole. Rain hammered the roof, wind hissed through the fir trees. Every instinct screamed to stay put. Guard the door. Wait for backup. Yet something uglier than fear crawled under my skin. The image of that tunnel, the width of those teeth marks. The way Mara's pulse fluttered under my fingers. Whatever made that wound was still out there somewhere between the old rail bed and the lake. Maybe licking pepper spray off its lips and deciding if it was hungry enough for another victim. I clicked on my headlamp, drew a deep breath, and started down the trail. The barrel of my handgun angled low but ready. Rain sheeted across the beam, turning every droplet into a silver dash. Somewhere ahead, the forest exhaled a low, hollow moan, as if it knew I'd just traded a wooden door for a thin line of light and a desperate prayer. And if that tunnel creature really was waiting in that dark concrete throat above the lake, I planned to make sure it never tasted anyone's blood again. The ranger compound faded behind me, just a small yellow point of light through the fir needles. Every other light in Cascade National Park felt smothered by the storm. No moon, no cabin porch glow, nothing but my headlamp carving a tunnel through the sheets of rain. The beam made the raindrops look like silver nails driven hard and fast from the sky. I turned left, taking the maintenance spur that runs parallel to Murrah Lake before climbing onto the old Spruce Railroad grade. It's one of those places visitors call quaint, right up until darkness turns it into an ink spill. Tonight, the path was a narrow strip of slick gravel hemmed in by dripping sword ferns, and the lake looked more like a slab of black metal than water. 5 minutes in, I found the first print. Barefoot, the length of my own boot, sunk an inch into the mud, soft as pudding. A lazy heel drag marked each step, as though the creature couldn't decide whether to stand or crawl. Rain was already pooling in the hollow, grinding flecks of grit into the shape. But I could still see tiny crescent marks at the front. Toenails, human, definitely fresh. A second print, a third, then dozens, weaving like drunk zigzags, but always aimed uphill toward the tunnel. Occasionally, a bead of darker fluid, a diluted smear of blood, spiraled away with the runoff. The sight pulled me forward with a sickening pull. You don't get many breadcrumb trails this clear in ranger work. "Jess, you copy?" I thumbed my radio. Static hissed, like the lake's own voice. No signal bars. The basalt cliffs on 3 sides turned communications into a gamble. And tonight, The storm had loaded the dice against me. I slid the radio back onto my belt, my pulse hammering. The grade began to pass through thicker forest. Fir trunks crowding close, branches clasped overhead. Something about that tight green corridor made sounds play tricks. The rain seemed to fall on 3 different rooftops at once, and my own breathing echoed back as if someone paced me shoulder to shoulder. I noted every detail to stay focused. The moss-slicked ties underfoot, the iodine smell rising from decaying cedar chips, the faint hush of waves creeping over the rocks below. A sharp, distinct sound cut through the air in front of me. 2 taps, a pause, then 3 taps. Stone on stone. My spine straightened so hard it hurt. A cougar's jaw? No. The rhythm was mechanical, intentional, almost like someone sending a code they expected me to read. I killed my light and crouched low. Night swallowed the grade, but the storm kept its own dim glow, just enough to outline the gaping mouth of the old World War II tunnel, 100 yards up the trail. Even without lightning, the wet walls glistened faintly like the throat of some giant sea creature waiting to draw breath. Clack, clack. I stepped off the gravel, my boots sinking into the ferns, and listened intently. Rain splashed on alder leaves. The lake ticked stones below. Then a new scent emerged. A rank, metallic smell mixed with the salty stink of tidal flats. It pushed through the forest musk like bad breath. Headlamp back on. Low beam. The light caught more footprints. Deeper now, toes digging in as if the owner was sprinting. Beside one print, I found a broken quartz pebble, already stained rusty red. Blood slick. Probably what he had been using to make the tapping sounds. My lamp trembled over the tunnel entrance. 30 feet high, lined with crumbling concrete ribs, it was darker than midnight inside. Graffiti covered the walls, most of it the usual names and dates, except for a fresh smear. Charcoal spirals wrapped around a stick-figure deer, its jaw a gaping crescent. The lines glistened wet, still shedding droplets. A gust of air blasted out of the tunnel, carrying the fishy, ammonia odor so strong my eyes watered. I raised the handgun with both hands, taking slow, deep breaths to keep the tremor out. The beam of my lamp now barely penetrated 10 feet into the tunnel before dissolving into misty smoke. Somewhere deep inside, water dripped in an irregular pattern that almost, but not quite, matched the tapping stones. It felt like hearing someone talk behind a wall thick enough to muffle every sound. "Park Ranger!" I shouted, my voice bouncing back, shredded and small. "Step into the light with your hands up," silence answered. First from the tunnel, then from the woods behind me. When you realize the whole world has gone completely still in a rainstorm, that's when your heartbeat sounds like something violent. My next step sent a pebble skittering. It ricocheted off the wall with a metallic ring. And right then, the tapping resumed, but faster and directly above me. I swung the light upward. For half a second, the beam froze on pale limbs spread across the arch. Fingers like spiders crawling on the concrete ribs. A head twisted at an angle no neck should manage. Eyes reflected the light. 2 green coins flared in the glare. Then the figure jerked sideways, merged with the shadow. Gone. Dust motes swirled where it had been. My skin felt ice cold. I backed towards the tunnel mouth, needing open space, but a wet slap echoed behind me. Bare feet hitting gravel. I spun around. Nothing. My lamp wobbled, searching the tree line. Only ferns bowing under the deluge. A voice rasped from somewhere in that dense darkness, stretched thin like fishing line. It ended in a gurgling laugh that sent adrenaline straight into my teeth. My headlamp flickered, the battery icon bleeding red. Perfect timing. Rain hissed down louder, like static turned to maximum volume. I thumbed the radio again. Jess, about 50 yards inside the tunnel. Suspect is mobile, and static devoured the words. The only reply was wind keening through the treetops like distant screaming. My lamp sputtered. I inched backward until my shoulders brushed the basalt outside the arch. The tunnel echoed every drip, magnifying every shaky breath. Footsteps slapped once more behind me, this time closer. I lunged around, weapon up, the grade empty. Ferns swayed in the wind, and my headlamp caught twin droplets sliding off a branch. Red. Not rainwater. I tracked the streak up to bark gouged by fingernails. My heartbeat vibrated in my ears. I whispered, "Show yourself." A breath so close it stirred the hair by my ear answered. My light died. The dark crashed in, thick and absolute. Somewhere close, gravel scattered. The sound of something sprinting. I pivoted by instinct, handgun raised, my finger tightening on the trigger. I could no longer see. Thunder cracked overhead, a white flash silhouetting a lean form lunging out of the trees, arms outstretched, teeth bared. I pulled the trigger, but the storm swallowed the gunshot and the scream together. And then everything was motion and rain, and the smell of salty, rotting breath closing in. When people talk about time slowing down during a fight, they forget to mention the way memory breaks apart. The thunder flash seared the tunnel mouth white, and in that strobe, I saw everything at once. The attacker's ribs were scarred with old bites. Water glittered on his teeth. His arms were veined like tree roots. Then darkness crashed back in, thick enough to choke on. My first shot went wide. The muzzle flash lit maybe 3 feet, but he was already inside that radius, swinging a fist that felt more like a wooden mallet. Stars burst in my skull. The handgun skittered somewhere into the black water. The next moment, my shoulders hit slick gravel, and a knee speared into my chest, forcing the air out of me with a sound I barely recognized as my own. He smelled of brine and rotted kelp. His breath was hot enough to scald despite the cold rain. His fingernails, cracked and packed with soil, dug for my face. I clawed at his wrist, felt tendons flex like braided wire under his mud-slicked skin. He growled the same half-formed word, blood flecking my cheek. Then his teeth flashed, aiming for my throat. Instinct, not bravery, saved me. I jammed my forearm between his jaws. Pain detonated as his incisors punched through my raincoat and flesh. The bone stopped the bite before he severed anything vital. I screamed, half rage, half terror, and headbutted him squarely in the nose. Cartilage crunched. Warm blood sprayed my face. His weight shifted. I used the opening, rolled us sideways, and slammed an elbow into the side of his neck. He hissed, scrambling like a wet cat. My knee found his ribs once, twice, until something gave with a hollow snap. He retreated a yard on all fours, backing wet breaths that sounded too much like barks. Lightning pulsed outside, silhouetting him. He was thin, shaking, yet still coiled to spring. In the brief bloom of light, my eyes caught a glint halfway between us. The handgun, 10 feet, maybe 12. It felt like a mile over the slick, loose rock. He moved first, lunging for me instead of the gun. I feigned right, dove left, my palms skidding through ankle-deep water, my fingers latching onto cold steel. In the same motion, I spun onto my hip, brought the pistol up with both hands. His shadow loomed, arms wide, head thrown back in an animal scream. I fired. The tunnel exploded with sound and light. The impact folded him mid-stride, a crimson mist mixing with rain spray. Second shot, center mass. It dropped him to his knees. He pitched forward onto the gravel, clutching his stomach, howling something that might have been words if pain hadn't chewed them into mush. I crab-crawled back, my gun aimed at the dim lump. Adrenaline tried to make my hands shake, but I fought it. He twitched, his fingers raking stones, then went still except for ragged breaths. Every drip in the tunnel sounded like a gun cocking. I held aim, counting them. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. By 20, I risked the radio again. Static. Then Jess's voice finally punched through, warped, but clear enough. Luke, status? Suspect down. Tunnel mouth. Need medical evacuation. Backup. Rabies protocol. The words tasted surreal. Suspect down. Like this was just paperwork. Not a man bleeding into the midnight water. But the training took over. Unload the magazine. Replace with a fresh one. Keep him covered from 8 yards. My arm throbbed where teeth had met skin. Blood ran warm inside my sleeve, washed cold outside by rain. Minutes stretched until red and blue strobe lights painted the forest wall. Jess arrived first, her pump-action shotgun ready, her eyes wide even for her. Deputies were right behind, their guns raised. I barked out positions, my voice wobbling like a faulty radio. They cuffed the suspect. He didn't resist, just whimpered and muttered about echoes in the hollow under Gargoyle Peak. paramedics rolled in, cut my raincoat, flushed the bite wound, and wrapped my forearm. Another team packed gauze into the attacker's wounds, slipping an airway between his crimson-foamed lips. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, he locked eyes with me, his pupils blown black, his nose crooked, still smiling through the blood. "The mountains are still hungry," he rasped. His words were wet and ruined. They pumped fentanyl into him, and whatever fight remained leaked out. Sirens carried him into the storm. Jess stayed silent while deputies swept the tunnel with their beams and cameras. Evidence piled up quickly. Quartz-clicking stones stained dark, half-eaten rabbit pelts, 2 drivers' licenses from missing hikers, laminated in gore, and charcoal spirals on the concrete, still damp enough to smear. When the adrenaline dump finally let go, I shook so hard Jess had to guide me outside. Dawn bled peach across Mirror Lake. Mist curled like breath from a tired giant. Wind rattled the fir crowns. Rain had slackened to a drizzle, fragile as cobweb threads. I remember thinking the world looked exactly the same, which felt obscene after what had happened in the dark. A month later, I sat in the Superior Court, my arm in a sling, rabies shots complete, nightmares just finding their rhythm. The man, Caleb Norris, 29, a runaway veteran with a pharmacy in his bloodstream, pleaded guilty to attempted murder and 2 counts of assault. Bandages cocooned his torso, and his eyes stared through people as if they were tinted glass. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he leaned toward the microphone, his lips splitting around the gauze. I kept it fed, but it's still there. His voice was barely a whisper. "Gargoyle Peak needs more." Court officers rushed him out before reporters could scramble. It didn't matter. The phrase headlined every local news site by noon. I drove back to the ranger station, stepped into my cabin, and found an envelope on the bunk. No return address. Inside was a photo of Mara and Katie outside Harborview Medical Center, their arms raised in a mock victory, stitches peeking under gauze. On the back, in looping Sharpie, it read, "Because you were there, we're still here." I pinned it above the desk, right over my incident report. Some nights when fog presses against the window and raindrops tap like quartz on quartz, I catch myself staring at that picture, listening for footsteps in the tummel's echo. Then I remember the storm, the scream, the taste of that kelp-rotted breath, and I checked the safety on my sidearm before bed. I signed on for a 2nd season at Cascade National Park. Someone has to walk the grade after dark. Make sure Gargoyle Peak's hunger stays caged. If the mountain ever asks for more, I'll be there. Flashlight up, heart hammering, ready to make the night roar again.